The night Lena Carter slipped a death warning onto a mobster's dinner check, she had exactly 4 seconds before the gunman reached his table. Most people freeze when they see a weapon being drawn in a crowded restaurant. Lena didn't freeze. She grabbed a pen. What happened next destroyed everything she'd carefully built: her quiet life, her invisibility, her safety. One scribbled message, one dangerous man, one choice that dragged her into a world where survival meant becoming someone she never thought she'd be. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The thing about working in an upscale restaurant is that you learn to read people the way some folks read newspapers. Quickly, efficiently, and with enough detachment to get through the day without getting involved. Lena Carter had mastered this particular skill over 2 years of serving Savannah's elite at the Riverside, a white tablecloth establishment that attracted the kind of clientele who measured their worth in silence and expensive watches. She wasn't supposed to be good at this job. When she'd first started, fresh out of a community college program that went nowhere, her hands had shaken every time she approached a table. The manager, a thick-necked man named Raymond who smelled perpetually of cigarettes and cheap cologne, had told her she'd last maybe a month. "You're too nervous," he'd said, not unkindly. "These people, they smell fear like dogs smell meat." But Lena had surprised him, and herself. She'd learned that if you kept your eyes down just enough, your voice steady, your movements precise, you became part of the furniture. Invisible. Safe. The wealthy and powerful talked around you like you weren't even human, like you were some kind of automated system that appeared when summoned and vanished when dismissed. Most nights this suited her fine. Tonight was different. It was a Thursday in late September, the kind of evening when Savannah's humidity finally broke and the air coming off the river actually felt breathable. The restaurant was running at about 70% capacity, busy enough to keep her moving, slow enough that she could actually think between tables. Lena had the Riverview section, which meant bigger tips but also more demanding customers who felt entitled to perfection because they were paying for a view of water and historic buildings. She just delivered entrees to table 12, a couple celebrating an anniversary they clearly weren't happy about, when she noticed him arrive. Victor Hale. He didn't have a reservation. He never did. Raymond simply materialized a table for him, the best one in the house, positioned in the corner with clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen. The same table, every time. Lena had served him perhaps a dozen times over the past 2 years, always on Thursdays, always alone, always with the same order. Whiskey neat, rare steak, no sides, black coffee after. He never smiled, never made small talk, never looked at her longer than necessary. But he tipped exactly 30% cash placed at the edge of the table before he left. Most of the servers were terrified of him. Maria, who'd been at the Riverside for 7 years, had once whispered to Lena that Victor Hale was connected, which in Savannah could mean anything from knowing a city councilman to running a drug operation. Lena had learned not to ask questions. In her experience, curiosity was expensive. Tonight, Victor wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was steel gray, cut military short. He was maybe 50, maybe older, the kind of man whose age was hard to pin down because he carried himself like someone who'd stopped caring about youth decades ago. When he sat down, he removed his watch and placed it face down on the table. A ritual. Always the same. Lena gave him 3 minutes before approaching, not because anyone had told her to, just because she'd observed that this was what he preferred. Long enough to settle in, short enough to not feel neglected. "Good evening, mister." "Hale," she said quietly, setting down a water glass. "The usual?" He glanced up. His eyes were a pale blue that reminded her of winter sky. "Please." One word, always one word. She put in his order and moved on to her other tables, settling into the rhythm of the evening. Table 6 needed more wine. Table 9's daughter was having some kind of dietary crisis that required Lena to recite the entire preparation method for the salmon. Table 12's anniversary was deteriorating into a tense argument conducted in aggressive whispers. Normal. All of it completely normal. Until she saw the man in the black jacket. He'd come in about 10 minutes after Victor, alone, and taken a seat at the bar. Nothing unusual about that. The bar got decent traffic on Thursday nights. But something in the way he held himself made Lena's instincts prickle. He wasn't drinking. The bartender, Chris, had set down what looked like a bourbon in front of him, but the glass hadn't moved. The man's attention was fixed on the dining room, his body angled slightly toward Victor's corner table. Lena felt her pulse tick up. She told herself she was being paranoid, told herself that 2 years of watching had made her see patterns that didn't exist. Then the man reached into his jacket. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have caught it. His hand disappeared inside the left panel, fingers wrapping around something with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. The jacket was cut loose enough to hide the shape, but Lena had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to recognize the specific way someone moved when they were armed. Her brain kicked into a speed that felt almost chemical. She had maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. The man was waiting for something. A moment when the dining room's attention shifted, when Victor was distracted, when the angle was right. Lena's hands were suddenly shaking again, the way they had during her first month. She was holding a water pitcher. Table 8 needed refills. She moved mechanically, pouring water while her mind raced through options that all felt impossible. She could tell Raymond. By the time she found him, explained, convinced him she wasn't crazy, it would be over. She could call the police. Same problem, plus she'd be calling attention to herself in a way that would end with questions she couldn't answer. She could do nothing. Mind her business, stay invisible, stay safe. The man at the bar shifted his weight. His hand was still inside his jacket. Victor's steak arrived. One of the other servers, Derek, who handled the kitchen-side tables, delivered it with the efficiency of someone who knew better than to linger. Victor picked up his knife and fork with precise movements, cutting into the meat with the focus of a man who ate alone often enough to have turned it into a meditation. Lena made a decision she didn't fully understand even as she was making it. She grabbed the leather check presenter from her station and pulled out a guest check. Her handwriting was usually neat, practiced from 2 years of writing orders and thank you notes for generous tips. Right now her letters were jagged, formed too fast. She wrote 3 words: armed, bar, left. Then she walked to Victor's table like her heart wasn't trying to break through her ribs. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice somehow steady, "just checking if everything's prepared to your satisfaction." He looked up, a brief flicker of something. Maybe annoyance, maybe just acknowledgement, crossing his face. "Fine." She set the check presenter down next to his plate. In all the time she'd served him, she'd never done this. "You didn't bring the check until asked. It was basic etiquette." Victor's pale eyes dropped to the leather folder, then back to her face. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Lena felt exposed, ridiculous, like she'd just made the stupidest mistake of her life based on nothing but paranoia and adrenaline. Then Victor's hand moved to the check presenter. He opened it with the same precise movement he used for everything. Read the 3 words. Closed it. His expression didn't change. He picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, set it down. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, visibly, and pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen as if checking a message. His thumb moved across the glass. Typing. 30 seconds later, 2 men Lena had never seen before entered through the main entrance. They weren't dressed like diners. They moved like Victor, that same controlled economy of motion. One of them was built like a refrigerator, his neck thick with muscle. The other was smaller, quicker, his eyes scanning the room with professional efficiency. They didn't approach Victor's table. Instead, they positioned themselves near the bar, casual enough that most people wouldn't notice. But Lena noticed. And more importantly, the man in the black jacket noticed. She saw the exact moment his plan fell apart. His hand withdrew from his jacket, empty, and he stood up from the bar with the jerky movement of someone whose options had just evaporated. He left cash on the counter and headed for the door, walking too fast to be casual but not fast enough to run. The smaller of Victor's 2 men followed him out. The refrigerator stayed, taking a position near the entrance. The entire sequence had taken maybe 2 minutes. Lena realized she was still standing next to Victor's table, holding an empty water pitcher like some kind of decorative statue. Her legs felt disconnected from her brain. "Thank you," Victor said quietly, without looking at her. "That will be all." She managed to nod and walk away. Her next 20 minutes were a blur of mechanical service, refilling drinks, clearing plates, smiling at customers who didn't see her. Her body operated on autopilot while her mind tried to process what had just happened. By the time she returned to Victor's section, he was standing, his meal finished. The leather check presenter sat at the edge of the table. When she picked it up, she found $300 bills inside, roughly 10 times what his meal cost, and a small business card beneath them. The card was matte black with a single phone number embossed in silver. No name, no company, just the number. And beneath it, in handwriting that matched the precision of everything else about Victor Hale, 4 words: "You may need this." Then he was gone. Lena stood in the middle of the dining room, holding a business card that felt like it weighed about 1,000 pounds, and understood that something fundamental had shifted. She'd stepped out of the shadows. She'd been seen, and she had no idea what that was going to cost her. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Lena went through the motions, clearing tables, processing payments, helping with closing duties, while her mind spun in circles. She kept the business card in her apron pocket, hyper-aware of its presence like it was radiating heat. Maria cornered her near the wait station around 10:30. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "Just tired," Lena lied. "Long day." "Yeah, well, welcome to the club." Maria grabbed a tray of dirty glasses. "At least it's almost over. You heading straight home?" "Probably." But even as she said it, Lena knew she wouldn't be able to sleep. Her apartment, a 1-bedroom efficiency in a converted house on the edge of the historic district, suddenly felt too isolated. She kept thinking about the man at the bar, the way his hand had disappeared into his jacket, the cold calculation in his eyes. She'd stopped a murder tonight. Maybe. Probably. And the man she'd saved was someone important enough to have people on call who could appear in minutes. Important enough that a potential killer had backed down just from their presence. Which meant Victor Hale was exactly what Maria had whispered about. Connected. Dangerous. The kind of man who operated in spaces where the normal rules didn't apply. And Lena had just put herself on his radar. By the time she finished her closing duties and clocked out, it was nearly 11:30. The night air was thick with the smell of river water and jasmine from someone's garden. Savannah at night was beautiful in a way that felt almost haunted. All those historic buildings and old trees draped in Spanish moss, shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. Lena walked to her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that rattled when it accelerated, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. She pulled out the business card, turning it over in her hands. Just a number. No context. No instructions. She should throw it away. Forget the whole thing happened. Go back to being invisible. Instead, she took a picture of the number with her phone and tucked the card into her wallet. The drive home took 10 minutes. Lena lived on East Taylor Street in a neighborhood that existed in the space between historic preservation and slow decay. Her building had good bones but needed work the landlord wasn't going to pay for. The stairs creaked. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking. But the rent was manageable, and the door had a good lock. She made it inside, deadbolted the door, and stood in her small living room trying to decide if she was being paranoid or not paranoid enough. The man at the bar had left. Victor's people had made sure of it. There was no reason to think she was in any danger. She'd done her job, more than her job, and been compensated generously for it. The whole thing could end right there, except Lena knew better. She'd grown up watching her father navigate the edges of legal and illegal work, seen how favors created debts, how one good turn could bind you to people you'd never intended to know. Nothing was ever really free, especially not with men like Victor Hale. She changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, made chamomile tea she didn't drink, and tried to distract herself with television. Nothing worked. Her brain kept replaying the evening, analyzing every detail, looking for mistakes she might have made. Around 1 a.m, exhausted but too wired to sleep, she finally opened her laptop and did something she'd been avoiding for 2 years. She searched for Victor Hale. The results were surprisingly sparse. A few mentions in local business articles. He owned property, had investments in shipping and logistics. One photograph from a charity gala 3 years ago, Victor in a tuxedo standing at the edge of a group photo, his face turned slightly away from the camera. Nothing that suggested criminality. Nothing that explained why he needed bodyguards or why someone would want him dead. But the absence of information was its own kind of data. People with that kind of money usually left bigger digital footprints. Victor's was deliberately small. Lena closed the laptop and finally went to bed, though sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams where she couldn't move fast enough, couldn't warn anyone, couldn't speak. She woke to her phone ringing. The screen showed an unknown number. For a moment, she considered not answering. Then she thought about the business card in her wallet and picked up. "Hello? Miss Carter?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Mr. Hale would like to meet with you. Today, if possible." Lena's mouth went dry. Who is this?" "A car will arrive at your address at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The meeting will take approximately 1 hour. You'll be returned home safely afterward." "Wait, I didn't—" "Mr. Hale wishes to express his gratitude personally. 2 o'clock, Miss Carter. The car will wait for 10 minutes. The line went dead. Lena sat on the edge of her bed, phone still pressed to her ear, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. They knew where she lived. Of course they did. Her address would be in her employment records at the Riverside. And men like Victor Hale had ways of accessing information that weren't technically legal, but were undeniably effective. She had about 4 hours to decide if she was actually going to get in that car. At 1:58 p.m., Lena stood at her living room window, watching the street. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, trying for something that looked presentable without seeming like she'd tried too hard. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup except a little mascara. She wanted to look like herself, not like she was trying to impress anyone. At exactly 2 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was expensive, but not ostentatious, the kind of car that blended into upscale neighborhoods without attracting attention. The driver stayed in the vehicle. Lena's hands were shaking again. She'd spent the past 4 hours talking herself in circles. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This was how people disappeared. But also, what was the alternative? Ignore the summons and hope Victor Hale was the kind of man who gracefully accepted rejection? She didn't think he was that kind of man. At 2:03, she grabbed her purse and walked downstairs. The driver got out as she approached, the same refrigerator-built man from the restaurant. Up close, he was even more intimidating, with a face that looked like it had lost several arguments with concrete. But when he opened the rear door for her, his voice was surprisingly polite. "Miss Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet with Mr. Hale." "Did I agree?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, driven by nerves. The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. "The car's comfortable. We'll have you there in 20 minutes. Lena got in because she'd already decided this was happening, even if she was still pretending she had a choice. The interior smelled like leather and something expensive, cologne maybe, or whatever wealthy people used to make their cars smell different from regular people's cars. Lena sat rigidly in the back seat, watching Savannah slide past the tinted windows. They headed south, away from the historic district, into areas she recognized but rarely visited. The driver didn't attempt conversation. Lena appreciated that. She was busy trying to control her breathing and remember that she hadn't actually done anything wrong. She'd helped someone. That was it. This was probably just a thank you meeting, maybe another generous tip, and then she could go back to her normal life. She almost believed it. 23 minutes later, they turned onto a private road that wound through live oaks and manicured landscaping. The property was gated, the kind of security that looked decorative but probably cost more than Lena made in a year. They passed through without stopping, the gates opening automatically. The house was, well, calling it a house felt insufficient. It was an estate. Modern architecture disguised as something traditional, all clean lines and expensive materials. The kind of place that showed up in architecture magazines. It sat on what looked like several acres, with the Savannah River visible in the distance. The car stopped under a covered entrance. The driver opened her door. "Mr. Hale is on the terrace. Someone will show you." Lena stepped out onto stone pavers that probably cost more per square foot than her entire apartment. The afternoon sun was bright, but the temperature was mild. She could hear water, a fountain somewhere, or maybe the river itself. A woman appeared in the doorway, late 50s, dressed in what might have been business casual, or might have been just how wealthy people dressed at home, tailored slacks, silk blouse, understated jewelry. Her smile was professional. "Miss Carter, please come in. Mr. Hale is expecting you." The interior of the house was exactly what Lena expected and somehow still surprising. High ceilings, art that was probably original. Furniture that looked like it had been selected by someone who understood negative space. Everything was tasteful, expensive, and slightly cold. They walked through several rooms before emerging onto a stone terrace that overlooked the river. Victor Hale sat at a small table, reading something on a tablet. He looked up as they approached, and Lena felt the same jolt of recognition she always did. This was the man from the restaurant. But here, in his own space, he seemed more solid somehow, more real. He stood. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" The words came out before she could stop them. Lena's filter, usually so reliable at work, had apparently decided to take the afternoon off. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. "Yes, you could have refused the car. You could leave now if you prefer. I'm not in the habit of forcing conversations." Lena stayed where she was. "Why am I here?" "Because you did something remarkable last night, and I wanted to understand why." He gestured to the other chair at the table. "Please sit. Would you like anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." Lena sat down because her legs were tired of supporting her nervous system. "I didn't do anything remarkable. I saw something concerning and I told you. That's it." Most people would have looked away. Victor set down his tablet. "In fact, most people did look away. You were the only one who noticed. And more than that, you acted, despite having no obligation to do so, and every reason to stay uninvolved. I guess I'm not great at minding my own business. Or you're observant, brave. Both qualities are rare." Lena felt heat rising in her face. She wasn't used to being looked at this directly, this intently. At the restaurant, Victor had barely glanced at her. Now his attention was focused like a spotlight, and it was deeply uncomfortable. "Look, She stopped, trying to organize her thoughts. "I saw someone who looked wrong. I made a call. I'm glad it worked out. But I don't want anything from you if that's what you're worried about. I'm not looking for a reward or favors or—" "What are you looking for, Miss Carter?" The question caught her off guard. "What? You're 26 years old, according to your employment records. You have an associate degree in criminal psychology from Savannah State. You've been working at the Riverside for 2 years in a job that's significantly below your qualifications. You live alone. No social media presence, no criminal record, no visible ambitions." He paused. "You're hiding." Lena's hands clenched in her lap. "You investigated me." "Of course I did. Someone saved my life. I wanted to know who she was." "And what did you find? Some waitress with student loans and a boring life? Congratulations. Mystery solved." "I found someone intelligent who's chosen to be invisible, which makes last night even more interesting, because you broke your own pattern. You made yourself seen. Why?" The honest answer was that Lena didn't know. In the moment, it had felt automatic, instinctive. Now, sitting on a millionaire's terrace, being interrogated like her motivations were some kind of puzzle. She wanted to give an answer that made her sound less pathetic than, "I don't know." "I didn't want to watch someone get killed," she finally said. "That's it. No deep psychological meaning. I just couldn't stand there and do nothing." Victor nodded slowly. "That's what makes it remarkable. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. You did it anyway. So what happens now? You thank me, I go home, we pretend this never happened?" That was the plan. Victor's tone shifted slightly, still controlled but with an edge that made Lena's attention sharpen. "Unfortunately, complications have arisen." "What kind of complications?" "The man at the restaurant, his name is Dmitry Volkov. He works for a family that's been attempting to expand their operations into territory I control. Last night's attempt on my life was meant to send a message. Your intervention prevented that message from being delivered." Lena's stomach dropped. "Okay, so you're saying I'm in danger now?" "I'm saying that Dmitry didn't work alone, and his employers are going to want to know how their plan failed. They'll look for variables, unexpected factors. When they review security footage from the restaurant, they'll see you approaching my table at an unusual time. They'll see me checking my phone immediately afterward. They'll see my people arriving within minutes. They'll think I'm with you." "Yes." The word landed like a stone in still water. Lena sat back in her chair, feeling her careful, invisible life crumbling in real time. I don't have anything to do with whatever you're involved in. I'm just someone who saw too much and acted too decisively." "I know. But perception matters more than reality in my world, Miss Carter. And right now, the perception is that you're someone I trust enough to warn me about threats. So what am I supposed to do? Quit my job? Leave town? You could, but it wouldn't guarantee your safety. These people are thorough. Victor stood and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out at the river. I have another option, which is, you work for me. Lena almost laughed. The sound came out strangled. Doing what? I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about whatever it is you actually do. You're observant. You notice things other people miss. You can read situations quickly and accurately. You understand criminal psychology well enough to predict behavior. He turned back to face her. Those skills are valuable, more valuable than you've been treating them. You want to hire me based on one lucky guess? It wasn't luck. You saw a threat developing in a crowded room where dozens of other people saw nothing. You assessed the situation, calculated risks, and executed a plan in under a minute. That's not luck, Miss Carter. That's talent. Lena's head was spinning. This conversation had jumped from thank you meeting to job offer in about 5 minutes, and she couldn't tell if Victor Hale was serious or if this was some elaborate test she didn't understand. What would I actually be doing? Initially, observation, analysis. I need people who can see patterns, anticipate problems before they develop. Your background in criminal psychology would be useful, understanding motivations, predicting behavior. Eventually, if you prove capable, the work would expand. Into what? That depends on you. Lena stood up, needing to move, needing space to think. She walked to the terrace railing and gripped the sun-warmed stone. Below, the river moved in slow currents, indifferent to human complications. This is insane, she said quietly. I don't even know what you really do. For all I know, you're asking me to help you with illegal? I run several legitimate businesses. Shipping, logistics, property, investment. All legal, all profitable. Victor's voice was closer now. He'd moved to stand a few feet away. I also operate in spaces where legal and illegal aren't clearly defined, where power matters more than law, where the wrong enemies can be fatal. I won't lie to you about that. So you're a criminal. I'm a businessman who understands that rules are negotiable for people with sufficient resources. He paused. I'm also someone who keeps his word. If you work for me, you'll be protected, compensated well, and you'll never be asked to do something against your conscience. How do I know that? You don't. You'll have to decide if you trust me. Lena turned to face him. I don't trust you. I don't know you. Fair enough. So let me offer you something more concrete. A trial period, 3 months. During that time, you'll learn what the work actually involves. You'll be paid $10,000 a month with a completion bonus if you decide to stay. If at any point you want to walk away, you can. No obligations, no threats, no retaliation. And if I say no right now, then I'll have my people keep an eye on you for the next few months. Make sure Volkov's employers don't decide to tie up loose ends. After a reasonable period, assuming no threats materialize, you'll be on your own. It was, Lena realized, a very careful answer. Not quite a threat, but not quite reassurance either. If she said no, she'd be dependent on Victor's protection anyway, just without any control over it. This is completely insane, she said again. Yes, but you're considering it. He was right. She was. Because buried under the fear and the shock was something else, a small, treacherous part of her that was interested. She'd spent 2 years being invisible, and before that, years watching her potential dry up while she worked dead-end jobs to pay off student loans for a degree she wasn't using. Last night, for just a few minutes, she'd been more than invisible. She'd been effective, important, seen, and she'd liked it. I need time to think, Lena said. You have until Monday. After that, I'll need an answer. That's 3 days. Yes. Victor pulled a phone from his pocket. Not a smartphone, she noticed, but an older flip phone model. He handed it to her. This has one number programmed, mine. If you need to reach me before Monday, use it. Don't use your personal phone. Don't discuss this with anyone. Dimitri's people might be monitoring communications. Lena took the phone, feeling its weight in her hand. You really think they'd go that far? I think you saved my life, which means you disrupted a very expensive plan. Yes, they'll go that far. Which is why, regardless of your decision, you need to be careful. Vary your routines. Pay attention to your surroundings. Trust your instincts. They've been good so far. The driver, whose name Lena still didn't know, materialized at the terrace entrance as if summoned. Victor nodded to him, then looked back at Lena. Marcus will take you home. Thank you for coming, Miss Carter. I hope you'll make the choice that's best for you. Lena wanted to say something cutting, something that would make her feel less like she'd already lost control of the situation. But her mind was too full of competing thoughts, so she just nodded and followed Marcus back through the beautiful, expensive house. The drive home was silent. Lena clutched the flip phone in her hand and stared out the window, watching Savannah scroll past. Everything looked the same as it had 2 hours ago, but felt completely different, like she was seeing her own life from the outside, recognizing how small and fragile it really was. When Marcus dropped her off, he handed her a small package through the window. From Mr. Hale. Inside was a keychain, simple, elegant, made of dark metal. It held a single key and a small medallion engraved with what looked like a family crest or corporate logo. Lena turned it over, not understanding. Emergency access, Marcus explained. Any property Mr. Hale controls. If you're in immediate danger, use it. Then he drove away, leaving Lena standing on the sidewalk holding a keychain that represented either protection or ownership. She wasn't sure which. She went upstairs, locked her door, and sat on her couch for a long time, turning the medallion over in her hands. The smart choice was obvious. Say no, take the passive protection. Hope the threat evaporated. Go back to her invisible life. But she kept thinking about the way Victor had looked at her on the terrace, like she was someone worth paying attention to. Like her skills, the ones she'd buried in favor of being safe and unremarkable, actually mattered. 3 days to decide. Lena pulled out her phone and opened her messages. She hadn't talked to her father in almost a year. Their relationship was complicated, built on love and disappointment in roughly equal measure. But he'd worked in gray areas his whole life. He understood men like Victor Hale. She typed, "Need to talk. Are you available?" The response came 5 minutes later. "Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m. You okay? Getting there. See you tomorrow." She set the phone down and finally let herself feel the full weight of the past 24 hours. Somewhere in Savannah, people were making decisions about whether she lived or died based on a 3-word note she'd scribbled on a guest check. And her best option for survival was apparently to work for a man who operated in the spaces where legal and illegal blurred into irrelevance. Last night, she'd saved a life. Tonight, she was trying to figure out how to save her own. Lena's father looked older than she remembered. Thomas Carter sat across from her at a corner table in a coffee shop on Broughton Street, his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't drunk from. His hair had gone completely gray since she'd last seen him, and new lines creased the corners of his eyes. But his gaze was still sharp, still assessing, still carrying that edge of someone who'd spent decades reading people for survival. "You look tired," he said. "Yeah, well, haven't been sleeping great." "The job?" Lena wrapped her own hands around her cup, buying time. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover. Loud conversations, espresso machine hissing, the general chaos of Saturday morning caffeine addiction. Nobody was paying attention to 2 people having a quiet conversation in the corner. "I got an offer," she said carefully. "Different kind of work, better money. But it's complicated." Thomas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He leaned back slightly, creating distance. "How complicated?" "The kind where I need to know if I'm making a huge mistake or the only smart choice available. Those aren't usually the same thing." "I know." Lena took a breath. "There was an incident at the restaurant. I noticed something I probably shouldn't have noticed. I intervened. Now the person I helped wants to hire me, and the people who were trying to hurt him might think I'm involved anyway." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more careful. "This person. He gave you a choice about the job?" "He says yes. 3 months trial, good pay. I can walk away any time. But if you don't take it, you're exposed anyway." "That's the impression I got." Her father nodded slowly, his fingers drumming once against the ceramic mug. It was an old tell. He did it when he was working through probabilities, weighing options. Lena had learned to read his gestures the same way she'd learned to read restaurant customers. Observation was the family business, apparently, even if they'd never called it that. Tell me about this person, Thomas said, without using names. Successful, legitimate businesses, but he admitted he also operates in gray areas. He has people who work for him, security, probably more. He's careful, controlled, doesn't waste words, keeps his promises, according to him. You believe that last part? Lena considered. I think he believes it. Whether that makes it true, I don't know. And the work he's offering? Observation, analysis, using my degree for once. She tried for a smile that didn't quite land. Reading people, predicting behavior. He says my skills are valuable. Thomas finally took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. Your mother would tell you to run. Get as far away as possible. Maybe she'd be right. But you're not Mom. No, I'm not. He set the mug down. I'm the guy who spent 20 years working dock security, looking the other way when certain shipments came through, taking cash payments that didn't get reported. I'm the guy who taught you to notice exits and read body language because I knew what kind of world we actually lived in. So no, I'm not going to tell you to run. What are you going to tell me? That if you take this job, you need to understand what you're really agreeing to. It's not just the work. It's the association. Once you're connected to someone with power, you become part of their world. Their enemies become your enemies. Their problems become your problems. You can't just clock out at the end of the day and pretend you're separate from it. Lena had known this, intellectually, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way that Victor's careful explanations hadn't. You think I shouldn't do it? I think you're already involved whether you take the job or not. So the question isn't whether you should get involved. It's whether you want some control over how that involvement plays out. Thomas leaned forward. This person, he's offering you protection and compensation. That's not nothing. But you need to go in with your eyes open. Don't lie to yourself about what this is. And what is it? You becoming someone different than you were a week ago. Maybe someone stronger. Maybe someone you don't recognize in a year. That's the trade-off. They sat in silence for a while. Around them, Savannah went about its Saturday morning, tourists planning their day, locals grabbing coffee before errands, everyone existing in a version of the city that felt completely separate from the one Lena was currently navigating. Did you ever regret it? She asked quietly. The choices you made? Thomas smiled, and it was sad around the edges. Every day. But I also fed my family and kept a roof over our heads when legitimate work wouldn't have covered both. You make the choices you can live with, Lena. That's all any of us can do. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, brief and warm. Then he stood up, leaving his half-finished coffee behind. Call me next week, he said. Let me know you're okay. I will. And Lena, whatever you decide, be smart, be careful. Don't trust anyone completely, not even the people paying you. Then he was gone, disappearing into the Saturday morning crowd like he'd never been there at all. Lena sat alone with her thoughts and her cooling coffee, trying to find clarity in the chaos of her mind. Her father hadn't told her what to do exactly, but he'd given her the framework to make the decision herself. She was already involved. The only question was whether she wanted to be involved passively, dependent on Victor's protection with no agency of her own, or actively with some measure of control. She pulled out the flip phone Victor had given her and stared at it. One number programmed. One choice crystallized into technology. Not yet. She still had until Monday. The rest of Saturday passed in a blur of nervous energy. Lena cleaned her apartment with obsessive thoroughness, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean, organizing closets that didn't need organizing. Physical activity helped quiet her mind, gave her hands something to do while her brain spun in circles. By Sunday, she'd made a decision. She just needed to convince herself it was the right one. She called the number at 2 in the afternoon. Victor answered on the second ring. Miss Carter. I have conditions, Lena said, not bothering with pleasantries. If she was doing this, she was doing it on her terms, or as close to her terms as possible. I'm listening. First, I want everything in writing, the salary, the trial period terms, the promise that I can walk away. I'm not taking your word on a handshake. Agreed. What else? I want to know exactly what I'm getting into before I commit. Not vague descriptions about observation and analysis, specific examples of what you'll actually expect me to do. Fair. We can arrange a more detailed briefing tomorrow. Anything else? Lena took a breath. This was the important one. I won't hurt people. I won't help you hurt people. I don't care how much you're paying me. That's a line I won't cross. There was a pause on the other end. When Victor spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been approval. I wouldn't ask you to. That's not the skill set I'm hiring for. Then we have a deal, assuming the briefing doesn't reveal anything that changes my mind. Understood. Marcus will pick you up tomorrow at 10. We'll go over everything in detail, and you can make your final decision afterward. Okay? Miss Carter, Lena, I think you're making the smart choice for what that's worth. I'll let you know if I still think so in 3 months. She ended the call before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was done. Or almost done. She still had the briefing, still had one more exit point if she needed it. But she'd crossed a line by making the call, and some part of her knew that the woman who'd picked up the phone was not quite the same woman who'd put it down. That night, Lena dreamed of the restaurant, but in the dream, she didn't write the warning. She just watched as the man in the black jacket pulled his weapon and everything exploded into chaos and screaming. She woke up at 4 a.m, sweating and shaking, and couldn't fall back asleep. Marcus arrived at exactly 10, the same black sedan idling at the curb. This time, Lena didn't hesitate. She locked her apartment and went downstairs carrying nothing but her phone and her slowly evaporating certainty that she knew what she was doing. "Morning," Marcus said, opening the door. His face was as impassive as ever, but there might have been a hint of acknowledgement in his eyes, like she'd passed some test by showing up. "Morning." The drive took them to a different location this time, not Victor's estate, but an office building downtown. Modern glass and steel, the kind of place that housed law firms and financial consultants. They parked in an underground garage and took an elevator to the 8th floor. The office they entered was nothing like Lena expected. She'd been bracing herself for something out of a crime movie. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, maybe some implied menace. Instead, it looked like a high-end consulting firm. Clean lines, minimal decoration, walls of windows overlooking the city. Professional and completely unremarkable. Victor was waiting in a conference room along with 2 other people Lena didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of posture that suggested military background. The other was a thin man with wire-frame glasses and the distracted air of someone whose mind was always 3 steps ahead of the conversation. "Lena Carter, this is Sarah Chen and David Rothstein," Victor said. "Sarah handles security and personnel. David manages logistics and intelligence. They'll be working with you during your trial period." Sarah offered a handshake that was firm without being aggressive. "Good to meet you." David just nodded, already looking back at the tablet in front of him. They all sat down around the conference table. Victor pulled up a presentation on the large screen mounted to the wall. "You asked for specifics," he said. "Here's what your role would actually involve." For the next hour, he walked her through scenarios. Not theoretical exercises, but real situations his organization had dealt with. A shipping manifest that contained subtle discrepancies suggesting smuggling. Security footage from a warehouse showing employees whose behavior patterns indicated they were stealing. A business meeting where competing interests created the potential for violence. In each case, Victor explained, the key wasn't muscle or intimidation, it was information. Understanding what was really happening beneath the surface. Seeing patterns that others missed. Predicting problems before they escalated. "Your job," Sarah said, taking over the presentation, "would be to analyze situations and provide assessments. We have people who handle enforcement. We have people who manage operations. What we need is someone who can see the whole picture and tell us what we're missing." "Like a consultant," Lena said slowly. "Like an analyst," David corrected, speaking for the first time. His voice was precise, clipped. "You'd review data, observe interactions, build psychological profiles of key players. Most of the work would be done from this office. Occasionally, you'd need to be present at meetings or events to make real-time assessments." "What about illegal activity?" Lena asked bluntly. "You said everything's legal, but these scenarios suggest otherwise." Victor leaned back in his chair. "We operate in industries where the law is flexible. Import, export, logistics, property development. Sometimes competitors use illegal means to gain advantages. Sometimes clients ask us to facilitate things that exist in gray areas. My organization maintains strict boundaries about what we will and won't do. We don't deal in drugs. We don't traffic people. We don't engage in violence except in self-defense. But you bend other rules. We interpret them creatively. Yes. Sarah pulled up another slide. A contract, dense with legal language. This is the agreement you'd sign. It includes strict confidentiality clauses, legal protections for both parties, and detailed terms for the trial period. David had our attorneys review it 3 times. Lena scanned the document, trying to parse the legal jargon. Can I have my own lawyer look at this? Of course, Victor said, though I'd recommend finding someone who specializes in non-disclosure agreements and corporate security. This isn't standard employment law. Do you have someone you'd recommend? He slid a business card across the table. Patricia Mendez. She's handled similar contracts before. She's not on my payroll. She'll give you honest advice about whether this protects your interests. Lena pocketed the card, impressed despite herself. Victor was making this easy for her to verify everything, to feel like she had agency in the process, which either meant he was genuinely fair-minded or he was very good at manipulation, possibly both. They spent another 30 minutes going over logistics. The salary was real, $10,000 a month, paid through a legitimate consulting firm that Victor owned. The work schedule was flexible, but demanding. She'd have access to this office, secure communication systems, and resources for research and analysis. She'd report primarily to Sarah, with direct access to Victor when needed. Questions? Victor asked when they'd covered everything. Lena had about 1,000, but one rose to the top. What happened to the last person who had this job? The room went quiet. Sarah and David exchanged a look. His name was Michael Torres, Victor said evenly. He worked for me for 4 years. He was good at his job, but he started to develop moral conflicts about the work. 6 months ago, he asked to leave. I honored that request. He moved to Seattle, started a consulting business of his own. He's fine. You're sure? I had coffee with him 2 months ago when I was in Seattle on business. He's fine, Lena. I don't punish people for walking away. I punish people for betrayal. The distinction was probably important, though Lena wasn't entirely sure she understood where the line was drawn. I need to think about this, she said, and talk to the lawyer. Of course. Take the contract with you. Patricia can meet with you as early as tomorrow if you'd like. Call me when you've made your decision. Marcus drove her home in silence. Lena clutched the contract in her lap, feeling its weight like a physical thing. Everything Victor had presented was professional, organized, reasonable. The work itself didn't sound particularly dangerous, just analytical, observational. The kind of thing she'd actually trained for in college before life got complicated. But she kept thinking about her father's words. You become part of their world. Their enemies become your enemies. She called Patricia Mendez that afternoon and scheduled a meeting for Tuesday morning. Then she went to work her evening shift at the Riverside because regardless of what she decided, she still had bills to pay and a life to maintain until she didn't. The restaurant felt different now. She moved through her tables with the same mechanical efficiency, but she couldn't stop analyzing everything through the lens of what Victor had shown her. Who was sitting where? Who was watching whom? What the quiet conversations in the corner might really be about. Raymond pulled her aside around 7. You okay? You seem distracted. Just tired. I'm fine. Well, try to look less fine and more focused. Table 9 is complaining about slow service. She apologized to Table 9, refilled their water glasses, took their dessert order with a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of autopilot service and growing certainty that she couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep being invisible, couldn't keep wasting the skills she'd worked for, couldn't keep pretending she was satisfied with safe. Patricia Mendez turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who practiced law from an office that looked like organized chaos. Files everywhere, multiple computer screens, coffee cups in various stages of abandonment. She read through Victor's contract with the focused intensity of someone who actually understood every word. It's clean, she said after 40 minutes. Surprisingly clean, actually. The confidentiality clauses are strict but standard for this kind of work. The termination provisions are weighted in your favor. You can leave with 2 weeks' notice during the trial period, 1 month notice after that. The compensation is excellent. There's even a severance package if they terminate you without cause. What about legal liability? Lena asked. If the organization does something illegal, am I exposed? The contract includes specific language indemnifying you against liability for activities you're not directly involved in or don't have knowledge of. It's not perfect protection. If federal prosecutors really wanted to squeeze you, they could try. But it's better than most employment contracts I've seen in this space. This space being what exactly? Patricia smiled without much humor. Private security consulting, corporate intelligence, import-export risk management. Pick your euphemism. The point is, your role as described in this contract is legitimate analyst work. As long as you maintain documentation of your actual duties and don't actively participate in anything criminal, you're reasonably protected. Reasonably? Nothing's guaranteed, Ms. Carter. But this contract tells me that whoever drafted it wanted to give you genuine protections, not just the appearance of them. That's unusual. Lena sat back in the deeply uncomfortable office chair. So you think I should sign it? I think the legal terms are fair and the compensation is excellent. Whether you should sign it depends on factors that have nothing to do with contract law. Can you work for someone who operates in moral gray areas? Can you handle the stress of that kind of environment? Can you live with the choices you'll have to make? I don't know. Then that's what you need to figure out. The contract itself isn't the problem. Lena paid Patricia's consultation fee, $200 that made her checking account wince, and walked out into the afternoon sun with no more clarity than she'd had walking in. The contract was fair. The work was legitimate, technically. The money was life-changing. Everything looked good on paper. She called Victor from a bench in Forsyth Park, watching tourists take pictures of the fountain. I want to accept, she said when he answered, but I need one more thing. What's that? I want to meet Michael Torres, talk to him myself, make sure he's actually okay and not just saying what you want him to say. Another pause. Lena was getting good at reading Victor's silences. This one felt like calculation, weighing whether her request was reasonable or suspicious. I can arrange that, he said finally. Video call, tonight if you'd like. He'll tell you the truth, Lena. I'm not hiding anything about his departure. Tonight works. 8 o'clock. I'll send you a secure meeting link. The call came through at exactly 8. Lena sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, hands nervous in her lap. The screen flickered to life, showing a man in his early 30s, Asian features, tired eyes, sitting in what looked like a home office with Seattle rain visible through the window behind him. Lena Carter? He asked. Michael Torres? Yeah, Victor said you wanted to talk. I've got maybe 20 minutes before my kid's bedtime, so let's make this count. His directness was refreshing. Lena leaned forward. Did he force you to do this call? Michael laughed. No, he asked. I said yes because I remember what it's like to be where you are right now, trying to figure out if you're making a huge mistake. And did you? Make a mistake? Working for Victor? No. Leaving? Also no. The work was good. The money was excellent. Victor kept his promises. I never got asked to do anything that crossed my personal lines. I got paid on time. And when I said I needed to leave, he made it easy. Michael rubbed his eyes. But it also consumed my life in ways I didn't expect. You can't do that job halfway. You're always analyzing, always watching. It follows you home. My wife said I stopped being present, stopped being able to just exist without calculating angles. Why did you really leave? Because I wanted to sleep at night without wondering if the analysis I provided contributed to someone getting hurt. Victor runs a tight ship. He's not reckless. He's not needlessly violent. But people in his world get hurt sometimes. That's reality. I couldn't separate myself from that anymore. Lena absorbed this. Do you regret working for him? No, it taught me things I'd never have learned otherwise. It paid off my student loans and my mortgage. It made me better at what I do now. Michael looked directly into the camera. But I'm glad I left when I did, before I became someone I didn't want to be. Is he dangerous? Victor? Yeah, absolutely. But he's dangerous the way a locked safe is dangerous, controlled, predictable, secure until you try to break in. If you're loyal and competent, you're safer with him than against him. The problems come if you betray him or if you get caught in the crossfire of his conflicts with other players. That's reassuring, Lena said dryly. Michael smiled. Look, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. If you take the job, go in with clear boundaries. Know what you're willing to do and what you're not. Don't let the money or the excitement make you compromise on things that matter to you, and have an exit plan, always. They talked for another 10 minutes about practical aspects, how the work was structured, what the office culture was like, how Victor communicated. Then Michael's daughter called for him in the background, and he had to go. "Good luck," he said before ending the call. "Whatever you decide." The screen went dark. Lena sat in her quiet apartment, listening to the sound of her neighbor's television through the thin walls, and made her final decision. She picked up the flip phone and called Victor. "I'm in," she said. "When do I start?" "Monday, 9 o'clock at the office." "Welcome to the team, Lena." She spent the next 2 days tying up loose ends. She gave her notice at the Riverside. 2 weeks. Professional. No explanation beyond taking another opportunity. Raymond was disappointed, but not surprised. "You were too smart for this place anyway," he said, which was probably the nicest thing he'd ever told her. She packed up her apartment in her mind, not physically, but emotionally, creating distance between who she'd been and who she was about to become. Her father called once to check on her. She told him she'd made her choice. He told her to be careful. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that careful might not be enough. Sunday night, she barely slept. Her mind kept churning through scenarios, possibilities, fears. By the time her alarm went off at 7, she'd been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and questioning everything. But she got up anyway, showered, dressed in professional clothes that felt foreign after 2 years of server uniforms, stood in front of her bathroom mirror and tried to recognize the woman looking back. "You can do this," she told her reflection. The reflection didn't look convinced. Marcus picked her up at 8:30. The drive to the office felt both endless and too short. When they arrived, Sarah was waiting in the conference room with a stack of paperwork, a new laptop, and a security badge with Lena's photo on it. "First day orientation," Sarah said. "We'll start with systems training, then move into your first assignment this afternoon. Victor wants you observing a meeting at 3. "What kind of meeting?" "Property negotiation. Potential investor who might be more than he seems. Your job is to watch, assess, and provide your read on whether we should move forward." Lena took the badge, the laptop, the paperwork. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. She'd made her choice, and second-guessing it now wouldn't help anyone. "Let's get started," she said. Sarah smiled. "Welcome aboard." The morning was a blur of passwords and protocols, security briefings, and confidentiality reminders. David walked her through their intelligence systems, databases of business contacts, surveillance footage archives, financial analysis tools that bordered on invasive. Everything was legal, technically. Everything was also designed to extract maximum information from minimum input. By lunch, Lena's head was spinning with information overload. Sarah ordered food to be delivered, Thai food that was too expensive and too good, and they ate in the conference room while reviewing the afternoon's assignment. "His name is James Constantine," Sarah said, pulling up a file. "Supposedly a real estate developer out of Atlanta. He's interested in investing in one of Victor's shipping ventures, but his background check came back clean in ways that feel wrong. No financial mistakes, no failed ventures, no public conflicts. Nobody's that perfect." "You think he's lying about who he is?" "I think something's off. Your job is to tell us what." At 2:45, Lena sat in a smaller conference room adjacent to where the meeting would take place. Sarah had set up a live video feed, perfectly legal, she assured Lena, since the room was Victor's property and all parties would be informed they were being recorded for security purposes. "Watch his baseline behavior during the small talk," Sarah instructed. "Then watch for deviations when the conversation turns to business specifics. Look for micro-expressions, stress signals, inconsistencies in his story. You want a psychological profile based on one meeting? I want your gut instinct backed up by observed behavior. You're good at this, Lena. Trust yourself." Then Sarah left, and Lena was alone with a screen showing an empty conference room. At exactly 3 o'clock, Victor entered with a man in his late 40s, well-dressed, confident-bearing, easy smile. James Constantine looked like money and success, and everything he claimed to be. Lena leaned forward and started watching. The first 15 minutes were textbook perfect. James Constantine sat with the relaxed posture of someone completely comfortable in expensive conference rooms, his hands resting casually on the table, his smile reaching his eyes at appropriate moments. He talked about Atlanta's real estate market with the fluency of someone who genuinely knew the territory, dropping references to specific developments and zoning challenges that would be difficult to fake. Lena made notes on the laptop Sarah had given her, documenting observations in the structured format they'd reviewed that morning. Baseline behavior, confident but not aggressive, appropriate eye contact, vocal tone steady and warm, no obvious tells, no visible stress. Victor asked about Konstantin's previous investments. The answer came smoothly, detailing a portfolio that included commercial properties in 3 states, a logistics company he'd sold for a substantial profit, and current holdings in shipping infrastructure that made his interest in Victor's venture seem logical. "I've always believed the future is in supply chain optimization," Konstantin said, leaning forward slightly. "The pandemic proved that. Companies that control their own logistics survived. Everyone else struggled." "Agreed," Victor said. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "Which is why I'm selective about partners in this space. The wrong alliance creates vulnerabilities. Of course, due diligence goes both ways. I've done my research on your operations, Victor. Impressive track record. Very few public failures." There. Lena's attention sharpened. The phrasing was slightly off. Very few public failures instead of strong success rate or excellent reputation. And it was a minor thing, but it suggested someone thinking in terms of what was visible versus what was hidden. The kind of distinction an investigator might make, not a businessman. She typed the observation, flagging it for review. The conversation shifted to specifics about the investment opportunity. Victor outlined the venture, a partnership with a European shipping company to establish more efficient routes between Savannah and several ports in the Mediterranean. The numbers were substantial. The potential returns were attractive. Konstantin asked intelligent questions about regulatory compliance, insurance coverage, projected timelines. Everything was going exactly as it should. Then Victor mentioned a detail about customs processing in Marseille, and Lena saw it, a micro-expression that flickered across Konstantin's face before he could control it. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Like hearing something he already knew phrased in a way he hadn't expected. She rewound the footage, watched it again. There. A brief tightening around his eyes, a fraction of a second before his smile engaged. He'd known about the Marseille customs issue before Victor mentioned it, which meant either his research had been extremely thorough, or he had access to information that shouldn't have been public. Lena's pulse quickened. She started watching differently now, looking for confirmation rather than just observation. When Victor discussed timeline projections, Konstantin's questions focused heavily on specific dates, not general windows, but exact timings. When would the first shipment route be established? When would the partnership agreement be finalized? When would Victor be traveling to Europe to meet with the other investors? The questions made sense on the surface, but there was an intensity to them, a need for precision that felt more like intelligence gathering than investment planning. 20 minutes in, Konstantin excused himself to take a phone call. Victor nodded, and the man stepped out of frame. The moment the door closed, Victor's posture shifted slightly, still controlled, but with an edge of tension that hadn't been there before. He looked directly at the camera. Lena startled, then realized he couldn't actually see her. The feed was one way, but he knew she was watching, knew she was analyzing. He was giving her a moment to process before Konstantin returned. Lena typed rapidly, organizing her observations into a coherent assessment. When Konstantin came back 3 minutes later, apologizing for the interruption, she was ready. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. More questions, more answers, more perfectly reasonable conversation that felt increasingly wrong the longer Lena watched. Konstantin's body language remained consistent. His story held together. His interest seemed genuine. But small things kept accumulating, the way he phrased questions to extract maximum detail. The fact that he never volunteered truly personal information despite Victor's casual attempts to build rapport. The almost imperceptible calculation behind his eyes when Victor mentioned specific business associates. When the meeting finally ended with handshakes and promises to review proposals, Lena had filled 3 pages of notes. Sarah appeared in the doorway 30 seconds after Konstantin left the building. "Well?" "He's not what he says he is," Lena said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I can't tell you exactly what he is, but he's not a real estate developer looking for investment opportunities. Walk me through it. They spent the next hour reviewing the footage together, with Lena pointing out the specific moments that had triggered her instincts. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally pausing the video to examine details more closely. Your read matches David's analysis of his financial background, Sarah said when Lena finished. The records are too clean. No messy divorces, no business disputes, no tax controversies. Either he's the luckiest man in America or someone manufactured his history. Law enforcement? Lena asked. Possibly. Or a competitor doing reconnaissance. Or someone from the Volkov organization trying a different approach. Sarah closed the laptop. Victor wants your formal assessment. Conference room, 5 minutes. Lena's stomach tightened. This was different from watching a video feed. This was presenting her analysis directly to Victor, with her professional credibility on the line. If she was wrong, if Constantine was exactly what he claimed to be, and she'd just read too much into minor details, this entire trial period could end before it really started. But if she was right and she didn't speak up, people could get hurt. Victor could get hurt. She thought about the night at the restaurant, the split-second decision to write a warning. She'd trusted her instincts then. She had to trust them now. Victor was alone in the conference room when she arrived, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as she entered, his pale eyes assessing. Sarah says you have concerns about Constantine. Yes. Lena sat down, opening her laptop. I don't think he's who he claims to be. His behavior during the meeting was consistent with someone conducting surveillance, not someone evaluating an investment opportunity. Explain. She walked him through her observations, showing the specific moments on the video feed where Constantine's responses had felt wrong. Victor listened without interrupting, his expression giving away nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your instincts are good, he said finally. David completed his deeper background check an hour ago. James Constantine exists, but the man in that meeting isn't him. The real Constantine is currently in Zurich recovering from a car accident. Someone is using his identity. Lena felt a strange mixture of vindication and fear. Who? We're working on that. But your analysis confirms what we suspected. This was reconnaissance, not business. Someone wanted information about my operations, my schedule, my partnerships. He looked directly at her. You did well today, Lena. Better than I expected for your first assignment. The praise should have felt good. Instead, it felt heavy. Because if someone was actively investigating Victor, sending people under false identities to gather information, then the danger she'd stumbled into at the restaurant wasn't an isolated incident. It was ongoing. What happens now? She asked. Now we determine who sent him and why, and we prepare for whatever comes next. Victor stood. Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll brief you on the broader situation, the context you need to understand what you've stepped into. Lena wanted to argue that she should know now, that waiting overnight with partial information was worse than just hearing everything at once, but the look on Victor's face suggested this wasn't a negotiation. Marcus drove her home in silence. The city looked normal, tourists on street corners, locals heading to dinner, everyone existing in a version of Savannah where fake investors and hidden threats weren't part of the landscape. Lena felt the disconnect like physical pressure, the sense of living in two worlds simultaneously. She'd been working for Victor for exactly 1 day, and she'd already uncovered a serious security breach. She didn't know if that made her valuable or if it just made her a target. That night, she sat on her couch with the lights off, looking out at the street through her window, and wondered if anyone was watching back. The keychain Victor had given her sat on the coffee table, the medallion catching light from passing cars. Emergency access to any property he controlled. She'd thought of it as protection. Now it felt more like a leash. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Good work today? Sleep well. S. Sarah, presumably. Checking in, making sure she was okay, or making sure she didn't panic and run. Lena typed back, Thanks. See you tomorrow. But she didn't sleep well. She kept thinking about the man who'd called himself James Constantine, about how perfectly he'd played his role, how close they'd come to accepting his story. If she hadn't noticed those small inconsistencies, if her instincts had been slightly less sharp, Victor would have walked into whatever trap was being set. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her until she finally gave up on sleep around 3 in the morning and made coffee instead. The next day started with a meeting in Victor's private office. Not the conference room, but a space on the 9th floor that Lena hadn't seen before. It was smaller, more personal, with actual books on the shelves and photographs on the desk. Through the window, the Savannah River glittered in morning light. Victor, Sarah, and David were already there when she arrived. The atmosphere was tense in a way that made Lena's nerves spike. "Close the door," Victor said. She did, then took the only remaining chair. David had multiple screens open on his laptop, displaying what looked like surveillance footage and data analyses. Sarah had a physical file folder in front of her, thick with documents. "We need to read you in on the current situation," Victor began. "What you witnessed yesterday with Konstantin is part of a larger pattern. For the past 6 months, the Volkov family has been probing my operations, looking for weaknesses, testing our security. The attempt at the restaurant was the most direct action so far, but there have been others: corporate espionage, attempted bribes of my employees, harassment of business partners." "Why?" Lena asked. "Territory. I control several key logistics routes and properties that they want. Rather than negotiate or compete legitimately, they've decided to apply pressure." Victor's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing market conditions rather than potential violence. "Your intervention at the restaurant disrupted their timeline. They'd planned for my death to create chaos, allowing them to move into the vacuum. Instead, they have to deal with me being alive and aware of their intentions." David turned one of his screens toward Lena. "This is the organizational structure of the Volkov operation as we understand it. Dmitry, the man from the restaurant, reports to Alexei Volkov, who runs their Savannah operations. Alexei reports to his father, Mikhail, who's based in New York. They're sophisticated, well-funded, and patient. They'll keep probing until they find an opening." "And fake Konstantin was another probe," Lena said. "Yes. We're still identifying who he actually is, but the goal was clear. Gather information about my European partnerships, my travel schedule, my security procedures. With that information, they could plan more effective moves against me." Sarah opened her folder and pulled out several photographs. "These are known Volkov associates who've been spotted in Savannah over the past month. We need you to familiarize yourself with their faces. If you see any of them in your daily life, you report it immediately." Lena looked at the photographs. A dozen faces, men and women of varying ages, all with the same calculated expressions. People who looked normal enough to blend in anywhere but dangerous enough to be flagged by Victor's intelligence network. "You think they're watching me," she said. "We think they're watching everyone connected to Victor," Sarah corrected. "You're new, which makes you interesting. They'll want to know who you are, what you do, whether you're a vulnerability they can exploit." "I'm nobody. I'm an analyst who's been here 2 days." "You're someone who saved Victor's life," David said bluntly. "That makes you somebody in their calculation." The reality of it settled over Lena like cold water. She'd known intellectually that her decision to help Victor had consequences, but hearing it stated so plainly made it impossible to minimize. She wasn't just an employee. She was a factor in an ongoing conflict. "What do you need from me?" she asked, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Awareness," Victor said. "Continue your work, but maintain security protocols. Vary your routes home. Don't discuss your job with anyone. If you notice surveillance, report it. We'll handle the rest." "And if they approach me directly?" "They won't. Too risky. If they want information about you, they'll gather it through observation and research. The danger isn't conversation, it's being used as leverage against me." Sarah pulled out another document. "We're implementing additional security measures. Marcus will be your primary driver for the next month. Don't use your own car for work-related travel. Your apartment building will receive upgraded security, installed under the guise of general improvements, and you'll carry this." She slid a small device across the table. It looked like a car key fob, sleek and unremarkable. "Panic button," Sarah explained. "Press it twice quickly, and we'll have people at your location within minutes. It's GPS-enabled, works anywhere in the city. Keep it with you at all times." Lena picked up the device, feeling its weight. Part of her wanted to object, to say this was excessive, to insist she could take care of herself. But she'd seen enough in the past week to know that objecting would be stupid. These people understood threats in ways she didn't. If they thought she needed a panic button, she probably did. "Okay," she said. What else? They spent the next 2 hours going over security protocols, communication procedures, and contingency plans. By the time the briefing ended, Lena's head was spinning with information: safe routes, contact numbers, recognition codes, emergency procedures. It was overwhelming and strangely reassuring at the same time. At least someone had thought through the possibilities. As she stood to leave, Victor called her back. Lena, I need you to understand something. This situation with the Volkovs, it's serious, but it's also manageable. I've been dealing with rivals for 20 years. I'm still here because I'm careful and prepared. You're protected now. That's not empty assurance. I know. She met his eyes, or at least I'm choosing to believe it. Fair enough. How are you handling all this? Honestly, the question surprised her. Victor didn't seem like someone who asked about feelings, but there was genuine curiosity in his expression, maybe even concern. I'm scared, Lena admitted, but I'm also, I don't know, engaged? Like my brain is working in ways it hasn't in years. That probably sounds crazy. It sounds honest. Fear is useful if you don't let it paralyze you. Channel it into vigilance. Is that what you do? Victor smiled, and it was the first time Lena had seen the expression look genuine. I haven't been truly afraid in a long time, but I remember what it felt like. Use it. Let it make you sharper. Over the next 2 weeks, Lena fell into a rhythm that was nothing like any job she'd ever had. Her days were split between analytical work, reviewing security footage, assessing potential business partners, building psychological profiles, and learning the broader context of Victor's operations. She sat in on meetings, observed negotiations, watched how decisions got made in an organization where power mattered more than protocol. Sarah became something like a mentor, teaching her the practical skills of security analysis, how to spot surveillance, how to recognize behavioral patterns that indicated deception, how to assess threats based on incomplete information. David taught her the technical side, how to use their intelligence databases, how to cross-reference information from multiple sources, how to build comprehensive profiles from fragmentary data. And slowly, Lena started to understand the ecosystem she'd entered. Victor's organization existed in the spaces between legitimate business and criminal enterprise, operating with enough legal cover to avoid prosecution while maintaining enough flexibility to compete with rivals who didn't care about laws. It was morally complicated in ways that would have troubled her 6 months ago. Now, she found herself evaluating situations based on pragmatic rather than ethical criteria. The shift in her thinking should have been more disturbing than it was. She saw Victor regularly, but not frequently. He trusted his people to handle daily operations, only inserting himself when decisions required his specific authority. But when he did appear, everyone's energy changed. He commanded respect through presence rather than volume, through certainty rather than threats. Lena found herself studying him the way she studied everyone else, looking for patterns, trying to understand what made him effective. He was ruthless but not cruel, strategic but not inflexible. He kept his word, punished betrayal severely, and maintained clear boundaries about what he would and wouldn't do. In his world, that made him almost honorable. 3 weeks into her trial period, David called her into his office with urgent energy that immediately put her on alert. We identified fake Constantine, he said, pulling up a file. His real name is Aaron Nash, former FBI, left the bureau 2 years ago under unclear circumstances. Since then, he's been working private security, mostly corporate intelligence. Lena leaned over his shoulder, reading the profile. So he's not Volkov's people? No. Which raises the question, who hired him to investigate Victor? Could be a competitor, could be actual law enforcement using a contractor to avoid official scrutiny. David scrolled through Nash's known associates. We're still tracing his recent contacts, but this complicates things. If federal authorities are building a case, we need to know. Is Victor doing anything that would warrant federal investigation? David gave her a look that was half amused, half exasperated. Lena, you're smart enough to know the answer to that. The question isn't whether Victor's operations could attract federal attention, it's whether they have attracted it, and what we do about it if they have. Fair point. Lena studied Nash's photograph, memorizing his features. He'd been good at playing James Constantine, good enough that she'd almost missed the signs. If he was working for law enforcement, that meant the threat wasn't just the Volkovs. It was exposure, prosecution, Everything Victor had built being dismantled by people with badges and legal authority. "Does Victor know?" she asked. "I'm briefing him in 10 minutes. He'll want your assessment. You're the one who caught Nash in the first place." The meeting was tense. Victor's expression remained controlled as David presented the information, but Lena could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This was a different kind of threat than the Volkovs. This required different strategies. "Recommendations?" Victor asked, looking between David and Lena. "We need to determine Nash's current employer," David said. "If it's FBI, we adjust operations to assume active surveillance. If it's private sector, we identify the client and assess their objectives." Lena, she startled slightly at being addressed directly. "I think we should assume worst-case scenario, federal investigation, and work backward from there. Tighten security, review all current operations for legal exposure, prepare for the possibility that everything we do is being watched. If we're wrong, and it's just corporate espionage, we're over-prepared. If we're right and we don't prepare, we're vulnerable." Victor nodded slowly. "Conservative approach. I appreciate that. David, implement Level 3 security protocols. Audit all current ventures for compliance issues. Lena, I need you to review our personnel files. Look for anyone who might be a planted informant or someone vulnerable to being flipped." "How many people are we talking about?" Lena asked. "Direct employees, about 40. Regular contractors and associates, another 100. Focus on anyone hired in the past year." It was a massive undertaking. Lena spent the next week doing nothing but background reviews, looking for inconsistencies in employment histories, financial pressures that might make someone susceptible to bribery, connections to law enforcement or rival organizations. It was tedious, detail-oriented work that made her eyes hurt from screen time. But she found 3 people who warranted deeper investigation. One had a brother who was a DEA agent. Another had unexplained deposits in their bank account that didn't match their salary. The third had lied on their employment application about previous jobs. Sarah handled the follow-up investigations. 2 of the 3 turned out to be nothing. The DEA connection was a estranged family. The bank deposits were from a side business. But the third person, a logistics coordinator named Martin Chen, had falsified his entire work history. When confronted, he admitted he was gathering information for a competitor, not law enforcement. Victor fired him immediately. Lena never learned what happened after that, and she didn't ask. By the end of her 4th week, she'd settled into the work with an ease that should probably have concerned her more than it did. She was good at this, better than good. She could read people, spot deceptions, anticipate problems. The skills she'd buried for years because they hadn't seemed useful in normal life were exactly what this world needed, and she was starting to like it. That realization hit her one evening as she sat in the office reviewing security footage. She was analyzing behavioral patterns in a warehouse where inventory had been disappearing, looking for signs of theft. It was 11 at night. She'd been working for 14 hours. She should have been exhausted and miserable. Instead, she felt alive in a way she hadn't since college, when she'd believed her degree in criminal psychology might actually lead somewhere interesting. Sarah found her around midnight, still at her desk. "You're going to burn out if you keep this pace," Sarah said, setting down a cup of coffee. "I'm close to identifying the theft pattern. Just need another hour." "It'll still be there tomorrow. Go home. Get some sleep." Lena saved her work reluctantly. Sarah was right, but momentum was hard to abandon once you had it. They walked out together, the building quiet around them. In the parking garage, Sarah's car was parked next to where Marcus waited with the sedan. "You're doing good work," Sarah said. "Victor's impressed. So am I." "Thanks. But Lena, don't lose yourself in this. I've seen it happen. People get so focused on being good at the job that they forget who they were before the job. That's dangerous." "You sound like Michael Torres." "Michael was smart. He knew when to leave. Not everyone does." Sarah's expression was serious in the dim garage lighting. "Just remember you have a choice. You always have a choice." The drive home gave Lena time to think about that. Did she have a choice? She'd signed a contract, yes, and technically she could leave after the 3-month trial period. But she was in too deep now, knew too much, had seen too much. Even if Victor would let her walk away without consequences, the Volkovs wouldn't forget her. Law enforcement, if they were investigating, wouldn't ignore her connection to Victor. She'd thought she was choosing a job, but she'd actually chosen a life. Her apartment felt smaller every time she came back to it, like the walls were closing in. She stood in the middle of her living room, looking at furniture she'd owned for years, and felt like a stranger in her own space. The woman who lived here, the invisible waitress who kept her head down and her ambitions small, didn't exist anymore. Lena Carter had become someone else. She went to bed thinking about choices and consequences, about the moment she'd written 3 words on a guest check and changed everything. If she could go back to that night, knowing what she knew now, would she make the same decision? The answer came easily. Yes. Whatever she'd become, whatever she was becoming, it was better than what she'd been, scared and small, and wasting her life serving other people's meals. The next morning, she woke to her phone ringing. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. Miss Carter, this is Detective William Rhodes with Savannah Chatham Metro Police. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Victor Hale. Would you be willing to meet with me? Lena's blood went cold. I don't think I should talk to you without a lawyer. You're not under investigation. I'm just gathering information for an ongoing case. Completely voluntary conversation. Then I volunteer not to have it. Don't contact me again. She hung up, hands shaking, and immediately called Sarah. Police just tried to interview me about Victor. What did you say? That I wouldn't talk without a lawyer and not to contact me again. Perfect. Don't engage with them at all. If they persist, we have attorneys who handle this. You did exactly right, Lena. But the call had shaken her. It was one thing to know abstractly that law enforcement might be interested in Victor's operations. It was another thing entirely to have a detective calling her personal phone, trying to turn her into an informant. She went to work that morning with her nerves stretched tight, expecting more calls, more pressure. Instead, Victor was waiting in the conference room with Marcus and 2 people she didn't recognize. A man and woman in their 30s, both with the controlled bearing of professionals. Lena, these are our attorneys, Robert Chen and Patricia Mendez. Patricia, the lawyer who'd reviewed her contract. She nodded in recognition. The detective who called you this morning is running an independent investigation, Robert explained. Not federal, not connected to any organized task force. He's looking into organized crime connections in Savannah, and Victor's name came up. It's low level, unlikely to go anywhere, but we need to ensure you're protected. What do I do if he contacts me again? Refer him to us. Don't answer questions. Don't try to be helpful. Even innocent information can be twisted in ways that create problems. Robert slid a business card across the table. You call this number before you talk to any law enforcement. Understood? Yes. The briefing continued for another hour, covering legal protocols and communication strategies. By the end, Lena understood that this was just part of the landscape. Investigations came and went, pressure was applied and resisted, the whole system grinding forward in a dance that had been going on long before she arrived. When the lawyers left, Victor asked her to stay. Your trial period ends in 2 weeks, he said. I'd like you to continue past that. The work you've done has been exceptional. Lena had been expecting this conversation, had been rehearsing her response for days, but now that it was happening, the words came harder than anticipated. I'll stay, she said, but I need something from you. Which is? Honesty. Complete honesty about what I'm involved in. No more surprises, no more information given out in pieces. If I'm going to do this, I need to know exactly what I'm part of. Victor studied her for a long moment. That's a dangerous thing to ask for. I know. But I can't work effectively if I'm operating with partial information. And I can't live with myself if I'm lying about what I know and what I don't. All right. Tomorrow, full briefing on all current operations. Everything. But once you know, you can't unknow. There's no going back to plausible deniability. I understand. They shook hands, and Lena felt the finality of it. No more trial period. No more pretending this was temporary. She was in, completely and permanently, for better or worse. That night she called her father. How's the new job? He asked. Complicated, but I'm staying. You sound sure. I am. It's not what I expected, but it's right. For now, anyway. They talked for a while about nothing important. His work, her apartment, the weather. Normal conversation between a father and daughter who'd learned to communicate around the things they couldn't say directly. Before hanging up, Thomas said, "Be careful, Lena. And remember, being good at something doesn't mean you're meant to do it forever." "I know, Dad." But as she ended the call, Lena wondered if that was actually true. Maybe some people found the thing they were meant to do by accident, by stumbling into situations they never planned for. Maybe being good at something was exactly the sign you were meant to do it. She fell asleep that night thinking about tomorrow's briefing, about all the secrets she was about to learn, about the point of no return she was deliberately choosing to cross. And when she dreamed, it wasn't nightmares of violence or danger. It was her, standing in Victor's office, finally seeing the whole picture clearly, finally understanding exactly what she'd become part of. In the dream, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The briefing started at 8 in the morning in Victor's private office, and by 9:30, Lena understood why he'd warned her about not being able to unknow things. Victor had laid out the structure of his empire with the clinical precision of someone presenting a business plan. Shipping routes that technically complied with customs regulations but moved goods through carefully constructed loopholes. Property holdings that generated legitimate income while also providing infrastructure for less legitimate transactions. Financial networks that obscured the origin of certain funds while maintaining enough transparency to avoid triggering banking alerts. The core principle, Victor explained, is that everything has a legal explanation. Every transaction can be justified on paper. We don't traffic drugs or weapons. We don't engage in human exploitation. But we facilitate movement of goods and capital for clients who operate in gray areas. We provide discretion. "You launder money," Lena said flatly. "We provide financial services to clients who value privacy. The distinction matters legally, even if it doesn't matter morally." David pulled up a network diagram on the main screen, showing the web of companies and partnerships that comprised Victor's organization. Shell corporations, limited liability partnerships, offshore accounts, all arranged in patterns designed to create distance between the money source and its destination. "Your role," Sarah said, "has been to identify security risks. Now you understand what we're actually securing. People who want to disrupt these operations. Law enforcement who want to prosecute them. Rivals who want to take them over." Lena stared at the diagram, feeling the weight of complete knowledge settling over her. She'd known Victor operated in morally ambiguous territory, but seeing the full scope, the deliberate construction of systems designed to circumvent laws while technically complying with them, made her complicity undeniable. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Why not just keep me focused on behavioral analysis without the broader context?" "Because you asked for it," Victor said, "and because I need people around me who understand the complete picture. Compartmentalized knowledge creates vulnerabilities. If you're going to be effective, you need to know what you're protecting and why. And if I decide this is too much, if I want out," Victor met her eyes steadily, "then you leave. But you leave with full knowledge of what we do, which means you leave as a security risk. We'd have to monitor you, ensure you don't become a liability. It would complicate your life significantly." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a reality. I'm not going to hurt you, Lena, but I can't pretend that walking away with this information would be simple." He paused. "Which is why I gave you the choice not to know. You chose knowledge. Now you deal with the consequences." The honesty was almost worse than a lie would have been. Victor wasn't trying to manipulate her or sugarcoat the situation. He was simply stating facts about how his world worked. Information was currency, and she'd just acquired knowledge that made her both valuable and dangerous. Lena looked at the network diagram again, tracing the connections with her eyes. Somewhere in that web of transactions and shell companies were probably good people, small business owners who needed capital and couldn't get traditional loans, immigrants sending money to family in countries with unstable banking systems, entrepreneurs operating in industries where conventional financing wasn't available. But there were also probably criminals, tax evaders, people exploiting the system for genuinely harmful purposes. "How do you decide who to work with?" she asked. "What separates a client you'll help from one you won't? We don't facilitate violence. We don't enable exploitation of vulnerable populations. Beyond that, we evaluate based on risk versus reward. Will this client bring law enforcement attention that outweighs their value? Will they create problems that complicate our other operations? Are they reliable, or will they become liabilities?" "That's not exactly a moral framework." "No," Victor agreed. "It's a practical one. I won't pretend to be more ethical than I am. I operate in spaces where conventional morality doesn't apply cleanly. I make choices I can live with, and I accept responsibility for those choices. David spoke up for the first time in a while. For what it's worth, Lena, I struggled with this too when I started. I wanted clear lines, good and bad, legal and illegal. But the world doesn't actually work that way. Laws are written by people with power to protect their interests. Following laws doesn't make you moral. Breaking them doesn't make you immoral. You have to decide for yourself what matters. It was the most philosophical thing Lena had ever heard David say. He usually communicated in data and analysis, not ethical frameworks. The fact that he was addressing this directly suggested he understood what she was wrestling with. "What did you decide?" Lena asked him. "What makes this okay for you?" David considered the question. "I decided that Victor's operation, while legally questionable, doesn't create more harm than the system it operates within. Banks launder money for cartels and dictators while maintaining legal cover. Corporations exploit tax loopholes that dwarf anything we facilitate. Politicians accept donations that are functionally bribes. At least Victor is honest about what he is." "That's rationalization," Lena said. "Maybe, but it's rationalization I can sleep with." Sarah had been quiet during this exchange, but now she leaned forward. "Lena, nobody here is going to tell you what to think. You asked for complete information. You have it. Now you decide if you can work with it or not. But decide today, because we have actual problems that need your attention, and we can't have you second-guessing yourself when things get urgent." The urgency in Sarah's tone cut through Lena's philosophical spiral. "What problems?" Victor pulled up a new file. "The Volkovs are escalating. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something significant within the next 2 weeks. We don't know specifics yet, but the pattern indicates a major move, either against me directly or against our operations." "What kind of move?" "That's what we need you to help determine. We have fragments of intelligence, surveillance reports, intercepted messages, behavioral observations from our people in the field. Your job is to analyze it all and tell us what they're actually planning." Lena felt the shift happen in real time, from wrestling with moral ambiguity to focusing on immediate tactical problems. It was easier to think about patterns and predictions than about whether she was complicit in criminal enterprise. Maybe that was dangerous. Maybe that was exactly how people ended up doing things they never thought they'd do. But the alternative was paralysis, and paralysis could get people killed. "Show me what you have," she said. They spent the next 4 hours going through intelligence reports. The Volkovs had been increasing their presence in Savannah, more soldiers visible in territories they'd previously avoided, more aggressive recruitment of local criminals, more pressure on businesses in areas Victor controlled. It looked like preparation for something, but the specific objective remained unclear. Lena built a timeline, mapping each observed action against dates and locations. Patterns started emerging. The Volkovs were focusing heavily on the waterfront, specifically on shipping facilities and warehouse districts. They were also making inquiries about Victor's schedule, his travel plans, his properties. "They're planning to hit multiple targets simultaneously," Lena said, pointing to her analysis. "Look at the timing. They're gathering information about at least 3 different locations, all within a tight geographic area. If they wanted to strike just one target, they'd focus resources. This spread suggests coordinated attacks." Victor studied her timeline. "Which targets?" "Best guess? The warehouse complex on River Street where you store high-value shipments, the shipping office downtown where you conduct most of your legitimate business, and possibly your estate, though the intelligence on that is thinner." "Why all 3? "Maximum disruption. If they hit the warehouse, they damage your operations and steal valuable inventory. If they hit the office, they access your records and communications. If they hit your estate, they eliminate you personally and send a message about their reach." Sarah looked grim. "That's a level of aggression we haven't seen from them before. They're not probing anymore. They're committing to war." "Do we have a timeline?" Victor asked. Lena hesitated. "Based on the pattern of activity, I'd say they're in final preparation stages. Maybe a week, 10 days at most. But that's speculation based on incomplete data." "Best speculation we have." Victor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "We need to disrupt their timeline, force them to either move prematurely or stand down and regroup." "How?" David asked. We make them think we know more than we do. Lena, I need you to draft an intelligence summary, something that looks like it came from an insider source, detailing their plans with just enough accuracy to be credible. We'll leak it through channels they monitor, make them paranoid about their security. That's going to make them more dangerous, Sarah warned. Paranoid organizations make reckless decisions. Better reckless than coordinated. If they rush into action before they're ready, we'll have the advantage. It was a calculated risk, and Lena could see the logic, but she could also see how it might backfire catastrophically. If the Volkovs suspected a leak, they might accelerate their timeline, but do so with even more aggression, trying to strike before they lost the element of surprise completely. I'll draft it, Lena said, but we should have contingencies in place for multiple scenarios. Agreed. Sarah, increase security at all 3 potential targets, discreet but effective. David, monitor all communications channels for reactions once we plant the leak. Lena, get me that summary by tomorrow morning. The meeting broke up with everyone moving into action mode. Lena returned to her desk and spent the rest of the day crafting a document that walked a delicate line, specific enough to seem credible, vague enough to not reveal how little they actually knew, alarming enough to create panic in the Volkov organization. She wrote about planned attacks on Victor's operations, mentioned specific locations but wrong dates, included details about weapons and personnel that were plausible but unverifiable. The goal was to make the Volkovs question their operational security, to make them wonder who was talking and what else might be compromised. By 7 that evening, her eyes were burning from screen time and her brain felt like it had been wrung out. But she had a draft she felt confident about. She sent it to Victor and Sarah for review, then finally allowed herself to leave the office. Marcus was waiting, as always. The drive home was quiet, the city sliding past in familiar patterns. Lena watched people on the streets, tourists taking selfies, couples heading to dinner, locals going about their evening routines. All of them existing in a version of Savannah that had nothing to do with the world she now inhabited. She'd been living 2 lives for weeks now, and the division was getting harder to maintain. The woman who went home to her small apartment felt increasingly disconnected from the woman who spent her days analyzing criminal organizations and drafting counterintelligence operations. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Volkovs, about coordinated attacks, about the possibility that her analysis was wrong and people would get hurt because she'd missed something crucial. The responsibility pressed down on her until she finally gave up on sleep and made coffee at 3 in the morning. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Stop overthinking. Your analysis is solid. Get some rest. Lena typed back. How did you know I was awake? Because I was the same way my first few months. The weight of it doesn't get lighter, but you get stronger at carrying it. Sleep now. Tomorrow's going to be intense. It was oddly comforting knowing that Sarah had been through this same spiral of doubt and responsibility. Lena managed a few hours of restless sleep before her alarm went off at 6. By 8, she was back in the office, reviewing Victor's notes on her intelligence summary. He'd made minor adjustments but approved the overall approach. David had identified 3 different channels for leaking the information, all designed to look like they came from different sources to maximize confusion. We'll deploy this over the next 48 hours, Victor said. Different pieces to different channels, so it looks like multiple leaks rather than one coordinated plant. And then we wait for their reaction, Sarah added. The waiting was excruciating. Lena tried to focus on other work. There were always background checks to run, security footage to review, reports to analyze, but her attention kept drifting to the Volkov situation. David had set up monitoring systems to track any unusual communication patterns in their organization, but the first 24 hours showed nothing obvious. Then, on the second day after the leak was deployed, things started happening. David called an emergency meeting at 2 in the afternoon. We're seeing panic. The Volkovs are scrambling, pulling people out of the field, changing communication protocols, conducting internal security reviews. The leak worked. They're paranoid. Are they standing down? Victor asked. No, they're accelerating. Our intelligence suggests they've moved their timeline up. They're planning to strike within the next 72 hours. Sarah swore quietly. So we traded coordinated planning for rushed aggression. Better rushed than prepared, Victor said, but there was tension in his voice that Lena hadn't heard before. At least now we have a tighter timeline. 3 days. We can defend 3 days. What do you need from me? Lena asked. Keep analyzing their movements. Any intelligence we gather over the next 3 days, I need immediate assessment. Look for patterns that tell us which target they're prioritizing, what time they're likely to strike, how many people they're deploying. For the next 72 hours, Lena practically lived in the office. She analyzed every scrap of intelligence that came in, surveillance reports from Victor's people in the field, intercepted communications, behavioral observations. She built models, ran scenarios, tried to think like the Volkovs and predict their moves. Sarah coordinated security preparations. Victor's warehouse complex received reinforced surveillance and additional guards disguised as regular employees. The downtown office implemented new access controls and panic systems. Victor's estate, the most difficult target to defend given its size and isolation, received the most dramatic upgrades, including additional personnel and early warning systems. Victor himself remained calm throughout, directing operations with the same measured control he applied to everything. But Lena noticed small signs of stress. The way he checked his watch more frequently, the slight tightness around his eyes when new intelligence came in, the fact that he wasn't leaving the office at night. You should get some rest, Lena told him on the second night, finding him alone in the conference room at 11. So should you, yet here we are. I'm too wired to sleep. Same. Victor gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Talk to me about something that isn't the Volkovs. It was such an unexpected request that Lena almost didn't know how to respond. What do you want to talk about? Anything. Your life before all this. What you wanted to be when you were younger. Whatever. Lena sat down, trying to remember the last time someone had asked her about herself with genuine curiosity. I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. Work with law enforcement, profile criminals, help solve cases. Very idealistic. What happened? Reality. Turns out those jobs are competitive and require connections I didn't have. I graduated with debt and no prospects. Ended up waitressing because it paid bills and didn't require thinking too hard. She paused. I spent 2 years being angry about wasted potential. Then I just got numb to it. You're not wasting potential now. No, but I'm also not exactly using my degree the way I imagined. Victor smiled slightly. Life rarely matches our imagined versions. I wanted to be a legitimate businessman. Built an empire the conventional way through legal means and hard work. Instead, I built this. Successful, but complicated, powerful, but constantly under threat. Not what I planned, but what circumstances required. Do you regret it? No. Regret is useless. I made choices based on available options. Those choices led here. I accept that. It was the most personal conversation Lena had ever had with him. For a moment, he wasn't the controlled, strategic operator who commanded respect through certainty. He was just a man who'd made compromises and lived with them, the same as everyone else. Thank you, Lena said. For what? For being honest. For not pretending this is something other than what it is. Before Victor could respond, David burst into the conference room, his usual calm completely shattered. They're moving, right now. Multiple teams mobilizing toward the estate. The calm evaporated instantly. Victor was on his feet, pulling out his phone. How many? At least a dozen vehicles, maybe more. They're not being subtle. This is a full assault. Sarah appeared in the doorway, already wearing body armor. We need to evacuate, now. But Victor was shaking his head, his expression hardening into something cold and calculating. No, we make our stand here, and we have defensive advantages, reinforced security, panic systems that connect directly to law enforcement. Running makes us vulnerable. Victor, they're bringing serious firepower. So are we. Get everyone into position, lock down the perimeter, and Sarah, he looked directly at her, get Lena to the safe room. I can help, Lena protested. Your job right now is to survive. You don't have combat training, you're not armed, and you're too valuable to risk. Safe room. That's not negotiable. Sarah grabbed Lena's arm, already pulling her toward the hallway. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could contribute something, but the look on Victor's face made it clear that objecting would be pointless. The safe room was in the sub-basement of Victor's estate, accessed through a hidden door in what looked like a utility closet. Sarah practically shoved Lena inside, a reinforced concrete space maybe 12 feet square, equipped with communications equipment, emergency supplies, and weapons that Lena didn't know how to use. "Lock this door behind me," Sarah ordered. "Don't open it for anyone except Victor, Marcus, or me. We'll have a code word when we come back. Clearance. Anyone who doesn't use that word, you don't open this door. Understood? Sarah?" "Understood?" "Yes." Sarah squeezed her shoulder once, brief and fierce. "You're going to be fine. Just stay put and stay quiet." Then she was gone, and Lena was alone in the safe room, listening to the sounds of preparation above her. Footsteps running, voices calling out instructions, the mechanical sounds of weapons being prepared. She checked her phone. No signal this far underground, which made sense for a safe room. But there was a radio system built into the wall, and after fumbling with it for a moment, she managed to tune into what sounded like Victor's security channel. Voices crackled through static, terse, and professional. "Perimeter motion detected. East approach. Multiple vehicles, confirmed hostile. Lock down the main gate. Route secondary team to..." Then the sound of gunfire, distant but unmistakable. Lena's hand started shaking. She'd known intellectually that violence was part of this world, but hearing it happen in real time was completely different. People were shooting at each other above her, people she knew, people who'd become something like colleagues over the past weeks, people who might die because of intelligence she'd helped gather, a leak she'd helped plant. The gunfire intensified. Through the radio, she heard Victor's voice, calm and controlled even in chaos, directing his people with the precision of someone who'd done this before. "Fall back to secondary positions. Let them come to us. Don't waste ammunition on suppressive fire." More gunfire. Then an explosion that shook dust from the ceiling of the safe room. Lena bit back a scream, clutching the radio like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "They've breached the outer perimeter," someone reported, voice tight with stress. "Expected. Fall back to the house. Make them pay for every foot." The battle was moving closer. Lena could hear it now even without the radio. The sharp crack of gunshots, the deeper boom of heavier weapons, shouting in multiple languages. The Volkovs had committed serious resources to this attack. They weren't trying to send a message anymore. They were trying to win. Then cutting through the chaos, a different sound. Sirens. "Police response," David's voice on the radio. "Multiple units, 2 minutes out." Victor's response was immediate. "Cease fire. Defensive positions only. Let law enforcement handle this." The change in tactical approach was brilliant and desperate at the same time. Victor couldn't win a prolonged gun battle without taking casualties he couldn't afford. But if he could hold until police arrived, the Volkovs would have to choose between continuing the assault and risking arrest, or retreating without achieving their objective. The gunfire didn't stop, but it changed character. More sporadic, more cautious. The Volkovs were making the same calculation Victor was. The sirens grew louder. Through the radio, Lena heard someone, maybe Marcus, report that police vehicles were entering the property. Then everything erupted into absolute chaos. The Volkovs made their choice. They'd come too far to retreat empty-handed. The gunfire intensified again, now including police weapons. Lena heard shouting, commands being barked in multiple voices, the sound of vehicles accelerating and crashing. She pressed herself against the concrete wall of the safe room, making herself as small as possible, and waited for it to end. It took another 20 minutes. 20 minutes of violence and chaos and sounds that would probably haunt her sleep for months. Then, gradually, the gunfire tapered off. The shouting became more organized. The sirens multiplied as more police units arrived. The radio crackled. "Lena!" Victor's voice, rough but steady. "You still there?" She grabbed the transmitter with shaking hands. "Yes. Are you... Is everyone... We have casualties but no fatalities on our side. The Volkovs weren't as lucky. Police have secured the scene. I'm sending Marcus down to get you. Code word? Clearance. Good. Stay there until he arrives." 5 minutes later, a knock on the safe room door. "Clearance." Lena recognized Marcus's voice and opened the door. He looked like he'd been through a war. His face was streaked with dirt and what might have been blood. His body armor was scorched in places, and his eyes carried the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd just survived something traumatic. "Come on," he said quietly. "It's over." Lena followed him up through the estate. The damage was extensive, bullet holes in walls, shattered windows, overturned furniture. In the main hallway, she saw 2 bodies covered with sheets surrounded by police markers. Volkov soldiers who hadn't made it out. The front lawn was a circus of emergency vehicles, police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. Officers were everywhere, taking statements, securing evidence, treating wounded. Several men in handcuffs sat on the ground under guard, Volkov soldiers who'd been captured. Victor stood near the main entrance, talking to a police captain. He looked untouched physically, but there was a tightness in his posture that suggested he was running on adrenaline and force of will. When he saw Lena, he excused himself and walked over. "You're all right?" he asked. Terrified but uninjured. "You?" "Same." He glanced back at the scene. "This is going to complicate things significantly. Police will want statements from everyone. Federal authorities will probably get involved given the scale. Our lawyers are already on the way, but expect a long night." "Did we win?" Victor's smile was grim. "We survived. The Volkovs committed major resources and failed to achieve their objective. They lost people, lost equipment, and now they have multiple soldiers in police custody who might talk. So yes, tactically, we won. But this kind of victory comes with costs." Over the next 6 hours, Lena gave her statement to 3 different officers, a federal agent, and eventually a detective who seemed more interested in Victor's operations than in the attack itself. The lawyers Patricia and Robert coached her through each conversation, making sure she didn't say anything that could be used against Victor or herself. Her role was simple. She was a consultant who'd been working late when the attack happened, took shelter in a safe room, and had no direct knowledge of what occurred outside that room. It was technically true, if incomplete. By the time they finished with her, it was 4 in the morning. The estate was still crawling with police, but the immediate chaos had subsided into methodical evidence collection. Victor had been taken to the police station for more detailed questioning, along with Sarah and David. Marcus drove Lena home, both of them too exhausted for conversation. She finally made it to her apartment as the sun was rising, collapsed on her couch still in her clothes, and fell into sleep so deep it felt like falling through black water. When she woke 8 hours later, her phone had 17 missed calls and a text from Sarah. "Everyone's okay. Take today off. We'll debrief tomorrow." Lena sat on her couch, staring at nothing, trying to process what had happened. She'd survived her first genuine life-threatening situation. Victor's organization had survived a major assault. The Volkovs had been dealt a significant blow, but the cost had been violence, death, and exposure to law enforcement scrutiny that would complicate everything going forward. This was the world she'd chosen. Not analysis from a safe distance, not abstract strategy, but real consequences, real danger, real blood. And the terrifying thing was that even after everything, even with the memory of gunfire still echoing in her head, she still didn't want to leave. She'd found the thing she was good at, the place where her skills mattered, even if that place was built on foundations that would make her former self recoil in horror. Lena pulled out her phone and sent a text to her father. "I'm okay. Can't explain right now, but I'm okay." His response came immediately. "I saw the news. Call me when you can." She would, eventually. When she could figure out how to explain that his daughter had just survived a gun battle and her primary emotion wasn't fear or regret. It was relief that she'd been valuable enough to protect. The debrief happened 2 days later in a temporary office Victor had set up while his estate underwent repairs. The space was sterile and functional, rented furniture, blank walls, none of the personality that had made his usual locations feel permanent. It reminded Lena that even power and wealth couldn't completely insulate you from chaos. Sometimes, you just had to rebuild. Victor looked tired in a way she'd never seen before. The assault had taken something from him, not his control or his authority, but maybe a piece of the certainty that had always surrounded him like armor. Sarah had a bandage on her left arm from a bullet graze she hadn't mentioned during the attack. David seemed unchanged, already buried in his laptop analyzing aftermath data. "The Volkovs are broken," Victor said without preamble. 6 of their people dead, 9 in custody, and their operational security completely compromised. Alexei Volkov is in federal custody facing weapons charges. His father in New York is cutting ties, publicly distancing their organization from what happened here. "So we won," Lena said. "We survived with acceptable losses. That's not the same thing." Victor pulled up images on the screen, surveillance photos of police activity, federal agents conducting interviews, news coverage of what the media was calling a gang war. "The problem is exposure. This much violence attracts attention we can't easily deflect. Federal authorities are looking at everyone involved, including me. Sarah picked up the thread. The good news is that the attack was so blatant, so aggressive, that we're clearly victims. Victor defended his property against an unprovoked assault. That's legally solid ground. But it also means more scrutiny on all our operations. How much scrutiny? Lena asked. Enough that we're suspending certain activities for the next 6 months, David said. No gray area transactions, no questionable clients, nothing that could give prosecutors ammunition. We operate completely legitimately until the attention dies down. Victor nodded. Which means restructuring. Some of our people will need to be reassigned. Some operations will be permanently closed. We're taking this opportunity to clean house, eliminate the riskiest elements, strengthen our legal positions, rebuild with better security protocols. Lena absorbed this. What does that mean for my role? Initially, it means helping us identify which operations are too risky to continue and which people might be compromised. Your analytical skills are crucial for that assessment. Victor leaned back in his chair. Long term, it means building a different kind of organization, one that can withstand this level of scrutiny and still function effectively. You're going legitimate? I'm going more legitimate. There's a difference. I'm not abandoning the work that made me successful, but I'm being more selective about it. Higher standards, better vetting, more careful execution, quality over volume. It was a strategic adaptation, and Lena could see the logic. The attack had exposed vulnerabilities in Victor's operation, not just physical security, but the structural weaknesses that came from operating too close to the line between legal and illegal. Pulling back wasn't retreat, it was repositioning. Over the next 3 weeks, Lena worked longer hours than she had during the crisis, helping Victor and his team systematically evaluate every aspect of their organization. She reviewed personnel files, looking for people who might become liabilities under federal scrutiny. She analyzed financial structures, identifying transactions that were defensible and those that weren't. She helped draft new protocols for client vetting, operational security, and crisis management. It was exhausting and strangely satisfying. She was helping build something, not just protecting what existed, but actively shaping what came next. Her recommendations carried weight. Her analysis influenced decisions. She'd moved beyond being just a consultant. She was part of Victor's inner circle now, one of the people he trusted with the future of everything he'd built. The realization came gradually, not all at once. But one morning she walked into a strategy meeting and found herself sitting at the table rather than against the wall. Victor deferred to her assessment on a personnel matter. Sarah asked for her input on security protocols. David incorporated her risk analysis into his financial models. She'd become essential. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like arriving somewhere she was meant to be, even if the route had been completely unexpected. Detective Rhodes, the cop who'd tried to interview her weeks ago, showed up at the office on a Thursday afternoon. Lena's stomach dropped when the receptionist announced him, but Victor's expression remained calm. Show him to conference room B. Lena, Sarah, join me. David, monitor but don't participate unless I signal. They met Rhodes in a room with glass walls and recording equipment. Everything documented, everything defensible. The detective was in his 40s, carrying the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades dealing with Savannah's criminal element. He sat down across from Victor with the weariness of someone who knew this conversation wouldn't accomplish much but had to have it anyway. Mr. Hale, thank you for meeting with me. Detective, what can I help you with? I'm investigating organized crime connections in Savannah. Your name keeps coming up. I run legitimate businesses. If my name comes up in criminal investigations, that's unfortunate but not my responsibility. Rhodes smiled without humor. You were the target of a coordinated assault by a known criminal organization. Multiple fatalities, federal weapons charges, the whole mess. You're telling me that's just bad luck? I'm telling you I was attacked on my own property and defended myself within legal bounds. If you have questions about that night, my lawyers have already provided comprehensive statements. I'm not interested in that night specifically. I'm interested in the pattern. The Volkovs don't attack random businessmen. They attack competitors, rivals, people who threaten their operations. So, what operations of yours were threatening them? Lena watched Victor handle the interrogation with the same precise control he applied to everything. He gave factual answers that revealed nothing, maintained a tone of cooperative politeness, and deflected every attempt to provoke him into saying something useful. Rhodes turned his attention to Lena after 20 minutes of getting nowhere with Victor. "Miss Carter, you're listed as a security consultant. What exactly do you consult on?" "Risk assessment, personnel vetting, threat analysis." "And you were present during the attack?" "I was working late. When the assault started, I took shelter in a designated safe room. I didn't witness the actual events." "Convenient." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Detective, Miss Carter has provided a full statement to multiple law enforcement agencies. Unless you have new questions, this feels like harassment." Mr. Rhodes held up his hands in a gesture of false surrender. "Just trying to understand the full picture. It's interesting how many people around Mr. Hale seem to have very limited knowledge of his actual business operations." "My employees focus on their specific roles," Victor said. "Compartmentalized knowledge is good security practice, or good criminal practice. If you have evidence of criminal activity, Detective, I suggest you present it. Otherwise, we're done here." Mr. Rhodes stood, his frustration barely concealed. "You know what bothers me, Hale? I've been working this city for 15 years. I've seen organizations come and go. Criminals who thought they were untouchable end up in prison. You've lasted longer than most, stayed cleaner than most. That tells me you're either very lucky or very careful." "I'm careful," Victor said simply. "And I stay within legal boundaries. Those boundaries seem pretty flexible from where I'm sitting." "Then perhaps you're sitting in the wrong place." After Rhodes left, Sarah let out a breath. "He's going to be a problem." "He's been a problem for years," Victor said, "but he's also limited by the fact that we don't give him anything actionable. He knows what we are. He can't prove it. That's the balance we maintain." Lena found herself thinking about Rhodes over the next few days. He represented the normal world, the one with clear rules and accountability, where people like Victor should face consequences for operating in gray areas. Part of her, the part that had wanted to be a forensic psychologist, that had believed in systems and justice, sympathized with his frustration. But another part, the part that had evolved over the past months, understood that Rhodes's version of justice was too simple for the complicated reality of how power actually worked. Victor bent rules, yes, but he also provided services that people needed, created opportunities that conventional systems didn't offer, and operated with more integrity than many technically legal organizations. The world wasn't as simple as legal versus illegal. That was the lesson Lena kept learning over and over. 3 months after the attack, life had settled into something resembling normalcy. Victor's estate was fully repaired, upgraded with security systems that made the previous version look primitive. The organization had been restructured into a leaner, more legally defensible operation. Several high-risk ventures had been closed. Some personnel had been let go with generous severance and stern warnings about maintaining silence. The federal investigation continued, but without any major developments. The captured Volkov soldiers had mostly refused to cooperate, taking plea deals for the weapons charges rather than risking longer sentences by implicating others. Alexei Volkov remained in custody, awaiting trial. His father's organization had pulled completely out of Georgia, abandoning the territory they'd fought to control. Victor had won, though the victory looked different than Lena had expected. It wasn't dominance or expansion. It was survival and consolidation, securing what mattered rather than reaching for more. Lena's apartment felt too small now, too disconnected from the life she was actually living. She'd started looking at new places. Nothing extravagant, but something that felt less like hiding and more like choosing. A condo in the historic district caught her attention, expensive but manageable with her current salary. It had high ceilings, actual space, windows that let in light. It looked like a place where someone with a future might live. She was signing the lease when Sarah called. "Victor wants to see you, his office, when you're available." "Is something wrong?" "No, but come soon." Lena finished with the real estate agent and headed to the office, her mind running through possibilities. Victor didn't do casual summons. If he wanted to see her specifically, it meant something significant. He was alone when she arrived, standing at his window looking out at the city. The late afternoon sun caught the silver in his hair, making him look older and somehow more solid, like he'd been worn down and rebuilt into something harder. "You're moving," he said without turning around. "How did you—" "Sarah told you." Marcus mentioned seeing you at a property viewing. I asked Sarah to confirm. Now he turned to face her. The condo on Jones Street. Good choice. Historic building, excellent security, close to everything. You investigated my apartment search? I pay attention to my people, especially the ones I depend on. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to talk about your future here. Lena sat, her pulse quickening slightly. Am I being fired? The opposite. I want to formalize your position, make you a full partner in the organization, not just an employee. You'd have equity, decision-making authority, and a seat at the table for all major strategic discussions. The offer hit Lena like cold water. Why? Because you've earned it. Your work over the past months has been exceptional. More than that, you've proven yourself during a crisis. You didn't run when things got dangerous. You didn't break under pressure. You adapted and contributed at the highest level. Victor sat down across from her. I need people like that. People who understand both the work and the risks. People I can trust completely. You barely know me. I know that you saved my life without expecting anything in return. I know that you asked for honesty instead of easy lies. I know that you've made difficult choices and lived with them. He paused. I know you better than you think, Lena. She tried to process what he was offering. Partnership wasn't just a job. It was permanent entanglement, complete commitment to Victor's world. It meant accepting responsibility not just for her own work, but for the organization's direction. It meant there would be no easy exit, no pretending she was just following orders. What would Sarah and David think about this? I've already discussed it with them. They support the decision. Sarah thinks you have excellent strategic instincts. David thinks your analytical approach balances out his technical focus. They're both in favor. And if I say no, Victor's expression didn't change. Then you continue as you are. Valued employee, well compensated, trusted with important work, but not a partner. Not someone with a voice in fundamental decisions about where we go from here. It was a choice between security and power, between following and leading. And Lena realized that the woman who'd written a warning on a dinner check 2 months ago wouldn't have hesitated. She would have said yes immediately, driven by the thrill of being chosen, of mattering. But the woman she'd become was more careful. She'd learned that every choice had costs, that power came with responsibility, that saying yes to one thing meant saying no to other possibilities. I need time to think about it, she said. How much time? A week. Victor nodded. Fair enough. Take the time. But Lena, understand that this offer has an expiration. The organization is evolving. I need to know who's in my inner circle and who's not. If you're not ready to commit at that level, I respect that, but the opportunity won't be available indefinitely. Lena spent the next week wrestling with the decision. She called her father and had a long, careful conversation where they both said more through what they didn't say than through actual words. She talked to Sarah over coffee, asking about what partnership really meant in practical terms. She even reached out to Michael Torres, the analyst who'd left Victor's organization, asking if he regretted not staying. I don't regret leaving, Michael told her over video call, but I sometimes wonder what I could have built if I'd stayed. There's no perfect answer, Lena, just the answer you can live with. On the 6th day, she went for a walk along the Savannah River, watching the water move and the tourists take pictures and the city exist in all its complicated glory. She thought about the woman she'd been, invisible, careful, wasting potential because using it seemed too risky. She thought about the woman she'd become, competent, strategic, comfortable with moral ambiguity in ways that would have horrified her younger self. She thought about Victor's offer and what it represented. Not just professional advancement, but identity. Accepting partnership meant accepting that this was who she was now. Not someone who'd stumbled into this world by accident, but someone who'd chosen it deliberately and would shape it going forward. The scary part was how little the decision actually frightened her. She called Victor that evening. I'm in. I'll accept the partnership. You're sure? No, but I'm committed anyway. There's a difference. She could hear the smile in his voice. Yes, there is. Come by tomorrow. We'll formalize everything. The paperwork took 3 hours. Contracts, equity agreements, non-compete clauses, confidentiality provisions that were even more stringent than her original employment terms. The lawyers explained everything in exhaustive detail. Lena signed each document with steady hands, feeling each signature bind her more completely to a world she could never fully leave. When it was done, Victor opened a bottle of expensive scotch and poured 3 glasses, one for himself, one for Lena, one for Sarah, who'd witnessed the signing. "To new partnerships," Victor said, raising his glass. They drank, and Lena felt the burn of alcohol and commitment mixing together in her throat. Over the next months, her life transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. She moved into her new condo and furnished it with care, choosing pieces that felt like her rather than like someone trying to impress anyone. She developed friendships with Sarah and David that went beyond professional courtesy, actual connections based on shared experiences and mutual respect. She stopped looking over her shoulder quite as often, though she never completely abandoned the vigilance that had become second nature. Her work evolved too. As a partner, she had input on major decisions. When Victor considered new ventures, Lena's risk assessment carried weight equal to David's financial analysis. When security protocols needed updating, her recommendations were implemented. She'd gone from observing to influencing, from analyzing to deciding. The Volkov situation resolved itself through attrition and legal pressure. Alexei took a plea deal that put him in federal prison for 12 years. His father's organization collapsed under its own weight, torn apart by internal conflicts and law enforcement pressure. The territory they'd fought for ended up controlled by smaller operations that posed no serious threat to Victor's interests. Detective Rhodes continued his investigation for another 6 months before apparently giving up. Lena saw him once more at a coffee shop downtown, and they made eye contact across the room. He looked tired and frustrated. She looked away first, not out of guilt, but out of acknowledgement that they existed on opposite sides of a line that couldn't be crossed through conversation. A year after the attack on Victor's estate, Lena stood in her condo looking out at Savannah's skyline and tried to recognize the woman in the reflection. She looked the same face, same basic features. But everything else had changed. The way she carried herself, the way she evaluated situations, the way she made decisions without second-guessing every choice. Her phone buzzed, a text from Victor. "Dinner tonight? Have a new opportunity I want your assessment on." She texted back, "Time and place?" Because that was her life now. Evaluating opportunities, assessing risks, helping build something that existed in the complicated space between legal and illegal, right and wrong. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she graduated college with idealistic dreams about using psychology to help people. But it was a life where she mattered, where her skills made a difference, where she'd found the thing she was genuinely good at. The cost had been her innocence and maybe some portion of her soul. But the gain had been purpose, competence, and the strange satisfaction of knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Later that evening, she met Victor at a restaurant, not the Riverside where everything had started, but a new place in a revitalized neighborhood. They talked about the opportunity he'd mentioned, some investment in shipping infrastructure that needed careful vetting. Lena asked questions, probed for risks, offered her initial assessment. Victor listened with the same focused attention he gave to everything important. Midway through the conversation, he paused and looked at her with something that might have been approval or might have been satisfaction. "You've come a long way from the waitress who slipped me a warning," he said. "Sometimes I barely remember being her," Lena admitted. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She considered the question honestly. "No, I regret not getting here sooner. I wasted years being afraid of my own potential." "You're not afraid anymore." "I'm terrified constantly, but I act anyway." "That's the difference." Victor raised his glass in a small salute. "To acting despite fear, it's the only way anything worthwhile gets done." They finished their dinner discussing logistics and timelines, strategy and contingency plans. Just 2 professionals working through a business decision, nothing unusual or remarkable about it to any observer. But Lena knew the truth. This wasn't just business. It was identity, purpose, the life she'd built from a split-second decision to write 3 words on a guest check. Every choice since then had been in service of becoming the person sitting at this table, someone capable, strategic, comfortable operating in spaces where conventional rules didn't apply. She'd saved Victor's life that night at the restaurant. But in a strange way, he'd saved hers too, rescued her from invisibility and wasted potential, given her a place where her particular combination of skills and instincts could actually matter. The cost had been everything she'd been before. The gain was everything she'd become. As they left the restaurant and stepped out into Savannah's warm night air, Lena felt the city around her in a different way than she had a year ago. She wasn't just existing in it anymore. She was part of its hidden architecture, one of the people who operated in the shadows and shaped outcomes without ever appearing in official records. It should have felt wrong. It should have troubled her more than it did. Instead, it felt like finding the place she was meant to be all along, even if the path there had been nothing like she'd imagined. Marcus was waiting with the car. Lena climbed in, settling into leather seats that had become familiar, comfortable. Through the tinted windows, Savannah looked beautiful and complicated, full of secrets and power dynamics invisible to casual observers. But Lena saw them now. She understood them. She was part of them. And as the car merged into traffic, carrying her toward her condo and her life and her future, she realized she wouldn't have it any other way. The quiet girl who'd survived by observing everything was gone. In her place was someone who didn't just watch anymore, someone who acted, someone who mattered, someone who'd learned to navigate danger with the same precision she once used to navigate dinner service. Lena Carter had found her place in the world. It just happened to be a place most people would never understand, in a world most people pretended didn't exist. But it was hers. And she'd earned it with every difficult choice, every compromised principle, every moment she'd chosen competence over comfort. The cost had been everything familiar. The reward was becoming someone she could respect, even if that person bore little resemblance to who she'd once thought she'd be. As dawn broke over Savannah the next morning, Lena stood at her condo window with coffee in hand, looking out at a city that held both her past and her future. The restaurant where everything changed was visible in the distance, just a building now, no longer weighted with the significance it once carried. She'd started there as someone small, scared, invisible. She'd become someone else entirely. And looking at her reflection in the glass, backlit by the rising sun, Lena finally recognized the woman staring back. Strong, strategic, dangerous in her own way. Exactly who she was meant to be.